Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened the power of Ocean Sovereign and fell in love with Harribel? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unfurling Tide. The air in the Hokage's office was thick with the ghosts of arguments past. It smelled of old paper, bitter tea, and the cloying sweetness of Tsunade's sake, a scent that had become more pronounced in the weeks following the Akatsuki invasion. Naruto stood before the council, not in the center of the room as a celebrated hero, but off to the side, an uncomfortable fixture they were still deciding where to place. His vibrant orange jacket was gone, replaced by a simple, dark blue tunic and black pants. The change was more than just cloth and dye. The color seemed to have seeped into his very posture. The boundless, explosive energy that once radiated from him was now a deep, still well. Tsunade sat behind her desk, her fingers steepled, the lines around her eyes etched deeper than they had been a month ago. To her right sat Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Udatane, their faces impassive masks of tradition and caution. But it was the man on her left who held the room's attention. Danzo Shimura. One arm was in a sling, his right eye bandaged, yet he exuded more authority than anyone else present. His presence was a block of carved ice in the already chilled room. The reconstruction proceeds, but our military strength is at its lowest in decades, Kaharu stated, her voice as dry as autumn leaves. The other villages watch. Kumo, in particular, will see this as an opportunity. Our Jinchuriki is the ultimate deterrent, Homura added, his gaze flicking to Naruto for a fraction of a second. He didn't use Naruto's name. He rarely did. His presence alone signals that Konoha is not to be trifled with. Naruto's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had been hailed as a savior, carried on the shoulders of the very people who had once shunned him. He had spoken with the man who killed his master, looked into the eyes of a shared sorrow, and made a promise to break the cycle of hatred. For a few days, it had felt like a new dawn. Then the reality of politics, of power vacuums and old grudges, had crept back in like a foul miasma. The cheering stopped, and the whispers began. A deterrent is only effective if it is controlled. Danzo's voice was a low rasp, cutting through the murmurs. The Nine Tails' power is a blade with no hilt. In the boy's last battle, he manifested 8 tails. We were moments from a catastrophe that would have dwarfed Pain's assault. We were saved by the 4th Hokage's intervention, a failsafe that can only be used once. Naruto's gaze met Danzo's single, dark eye. There was no gratitude there for saving the village. Only cold, pragmatic assessment. He saw a weapon that had nearly misfired. Tsunade slammed her hand on the desk, not with the earth-shattering force of her anger, but with a weary finality. Naruto brought himself back from the brink. He defeated the final path of pain and saved us all. That is the reality of what happened, Danzo. A reality born of luck, Danzo countered smoothly. And luck is not a strategy. The Jinchuriki requires stricter protocols. A dedicated Anbu guard. His movements must be monitored. His training supervised by those who understand the nuances of controlling such power. And spoken words hung in the air, supervised by me. By root. Naruto felt a familiar, hot spike of the Kyuubi's chakra flare in his gut, a phantom echo of rage. He smothered it. It was what they expected, what they wanted. The impulsive, loud-mouthed kid who would shout and prove their point for them. He had learned in the smoking crater of his home that shouting was useless. Nagato had shouted with bombs and gravity, and all it had done was create more pain. He had tried to talk to his friends. Sakura was consumed by the rebuilding of the hospital, her focus a pinpoint laser of desperate work. When he tried to explain the emptiness that gnawed at him, the feeling of being a celebrated statue rather than a person, she had offered a tired smile and said they were all just busy. Kakashi was even more distant, spending his days coordinating patrols and his nights staring at the memorial stone, his grief a wall Naruto couldn't breach. Shikamaru understood the politics, but his advice was always one of pragmatism. Play the game, Naruto. It's a drag, but that's how it works. You're too important to be sidelined now. But Naruto didn't want to play the game. He had walked through the valley of death, spoken with his father's spirit, and inherited his master's will. The game of backroom deals and power plays felt insultingly small. He felt like a man who had stared into the heart of a star, only to be told to worry about the price of lamp oil. He let out a slow breath, the stillness in the room amplifying the sound. All eyes turned to him. "Is that all?" he asked. His voice was quiet, devoid of its usual boisterous energy. It was the voice of a man asking if a meeting was adjourned, not a hero challenging his commanders. The question caught them off guard. Tsunade's eyes widened slightly. Danzo's visible eyebrow twitched. "We are discussing the security of the entire village, Naruto," Kaharu said, her tone sharp with reprimand. "I know," Naruto replied, his gaze still locked on Danzo. "You're discussing your weapon, making sure it doesn't rust, making sure it stays pointed in the right direction." "I heard you." He offered no anger, just a flat statement of fact that was more damning than any accusation. He turned and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Tsunade demanded, rising from her seat. "This meeting is not over. I need some air," Naruto said, not looking back. He placed his hand on the door. "You can decide what to do with your deterrent. Let me know when you've made up your mind." He walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The press, viewer in the room didn't lessen with his departure. It solidified, becoming something heavy and suffocating. Danzo's one eye gleamed with a dark, calculating light. "You see, Hokage-sama. The instability is already showing. He is becoming detached, arrogant. This is how it begins." Tsunade sank back into her chair, the fight draining out of her. She looked at the sake bottle on her desk and, for the first time in a long time, felt no desire for it. She had watched that boy grow from a lonely outcast into a hero. And now, she was watching him drift away, and she felt utterly powerless to stop it. The sounds of hammers and shouting faded behind Naruto as he moved through the recovering village. He saw familiar faces, Tsuki and Ayame serving bowls of ramen from a temporary stall, Kiba arguing with Shino over the proper way to clear rubble, but he felt a pane of glass between himself and all of it. They smiled and waved at their hero. He smiled and waved back. It felt like a role he was playing. His feet carried him beyond the village walls, past the training grounds where he'd spent his childhood, and onto the paths that led toward the coast. The Land of Fire was not known for its dramatic shoreline, but there was a stretch of cliffs and jagged rocks a few hours from Konoha that had always been deserted. It was a place of raw, untamed nature, where the ocean beat relentlessly against the land. It was a place he could be loud. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet that reminded him painfully of the final Rasengan he had driven into pain. He stood on the edge of a high cliff, the wind whipping his dark blue tunic around him, the salty spray misting his face. Below, the waves crashed against the black rocks with a percussive rhythm, a heartbeat for the world. He needed to burn off the frustration, the coiling anger that Danzo's words had stoked. He began to practice, not the flashy techniques, but the fundamentals. He ran through katas, his movements sharp and precise. He channeled chakra, molding it into Rasengans that spun in his palm, humming with contained power, before letting them dissipate. He was pushing himself, Seiken. The familiar burn of exhaustion that used to quiet his mind. But today, it wasn't working. Every punch, every pulse of chakra, only seemed to amplify the feeling of being a bird in a gilded cage. He remembered Nagato's words. This world will not know peace. It is a cycle of hatred that cannot be broken. He had declared he would break it. But how? By letting men like Danzo leash him. By becoming the very thing he was fighting against. A tool of power to be wielded by the strong. "You are not a vessel. You are a source." The thought came from nowhere. It wasn't his own. It wasn't the Kyuubi's rumbling growl. It was a whisper that felt as ancient as the stones beneath his feet. It felt like the sea itself was speaking to him. A storm was gathering on the horizon, moving in with unnatural speed. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray. The wind shrieked, and the waves below turned from a steady rhythm to a chaotic frenzy, slamming against the cliffs with explosive force. Rain began to fall, not as a drizzle, but as a torrential downpour, cold and sharp. Naruto didn't seek shelter. He stood in the heart of the maelstrom, letting the rain soak him to the bone, the wind tearing at his clothes. The chaos of the storm felt like a reflection of his own soul. He threw his head back and screamed, a raw, wordless cry of fury and grief and confusion that was swallowed by the roar of the wind and water. As the cry tore from his throat, something inside him snapped. It wasn't the red, searing power of the fox. This was something different. It was cool, deep, and overwhelmingly vast. It fell, chi like a dam breaking within his very soul. The chakra network in his body, the intricate web that every shinobi lived and died by, was suddenly just a tributary to a much larger, more profound ocean of energy. He felt a connection unfurl from him, not just into the storm, but into the water itself. He could feel every drop of rain as it struck his skin. He could feel the immense, crushing weight of the waves smashing against the cliffs. But it was more than that. He could feel the entire ocean. He felt the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches miles away. He felt the gentle lapping of waves on a distant shore in the land of tea. He felt the polar ice caps, the lazy currents of the southern seas, the water vapor rising from the Great Lakes. It was an impossible, terrifying, exhilarating symphony of awareness. He was a single drop of water that had just realized it was the entire ocean. His eyes snapped open. They were no longer the cerulean blue of the sky. They were the deep, fathomless azure of the midnight zone, glowing with a soft, internal light. The storm, which had been raging with apocalyptic fury, began to calm. The howling wind softened to a whisper. The torrential rain eased into a gentle fall. The titanic waves below ceased their assault, the water's surface smoothing out until it was like a vast sheet of dark glass. The entire, furious storm had been silenced in moments. Naruto hadn't performed a single hand sign. He hadn't molded an ounce of what he knew as chakra. He had simply wished it. He had felt the storm's rage, recognized it as a part of his own, and had willed it to be calm. And the sea had obeyed. He slowly raised a hand, palm up. The rain around him stopped, the drops hovering in the air like a constellation of tiny diamonds. He clenched his fist, and the suspended drops coalesced, flowing together into a sphere of pure, swirling water that danced above his palm. It hummed with a power that made a Rasengan feel like a child's toy. This was his. Not borrowed, not sealed, his. The realization was a bedrock of absolute certainty settling in his soul. The confusion, the anger, the feeling of being a piece on a board, it all washed away, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. He was not a piece. He was the board, the ocean, the world. A flicker of movement from the trees behind him broke his concentration. The sphere of water splashed onto the rock. He didn't need to turn around. He could feel them, 6 of them. He could feel the water in their bodies, the steady pump of their hearts, the moisture in their lungs as they breathed. Their presence was as clear to him as if they were standing in broad daylight. Uzumaki Naruto, a flat, emotionless voice said. By order of the Konoha Council, under the authority of Lord Danzo, you are to come with us. You are deemed a high-risk asset requiring immediate containment. 6 figures dropped from the trees, landing silently on the wet rock. They wore the blank, white animal masks and gray uniforms of Root Anbu. Their tanto blades were already drawn, gleaming faintly in the twilight. Naruto slowly turned to face them. He looked at them, at the fanaticism burning behind their porcelain masks, and he felt a deep, profound pity. They were everything he had just refused to be. Tools, leashed and pointed. Danzo doesn't waste any time, Naruto said, his voice as calm as the sea behind him. Resistance will be met with maximum force, the lead Anbu stated. We are authorized to use suppression seals and restraining jutsu. Do not force our hand. Naruto took a step forward. You think you can restrain this? In that instant, the 6 Anbu moved. They were a blur of motion, a coordinated attack from all sides. 2 came in high with their blades, 2 came in low to sweep his legs. And 2 flashed through hand signs, their mouths opening to spew jutsu. One prepared a wind style, vacuum blade. The other, an earth style, mobile core. Naruto didn't move, he simply raised his hand again. The Anbu performing the wind jutsu suddenly choked, his hands flying to his throat. No air would come out. The moisture in his lungs had condensed, filling them with water. He collapsed, spasming silently. The earth user's jutsu erupted, but the ground beneath Naruto didn't move. Instead, the very rock under the Anbu's feet turned to mud, the water within the stone itself answering Naruto's will. The shinobi sank to his knees, immobilized. The four with blades were almost on him. The tips of their tantos were inches from his body. And then they stopped. Completely. They were frozen in place, their muscles locked. Their eyes wide with terror behind their masks. Naruto hadn't touched them. He was simply controlling the water in their blood. He wasn't boiling it or freezing it. He was just holding it still. Arresting the flow, creating a pressure in their veins that locked every muscle in their bodies. It was effortless. A flex of will. Tell me, Naruto said, walking slowl. Why between the living statues of his would-be captors? What good are your jutsu? Your blades? Your training? You are 70% water. You live on a planet that is 70% water. And you thought you could restrain the ocean itself. He stopped in front of the captain. He could feel the man's terror, a frantic, screaming thing trapped behind a wall of paralyzed flesh. Naruto reached out and gently tapped the ANBU's mask. It cracked and fell away, revealing the face of a young man, no older than himself, his eyes filled with sheer, uncomprehending horror. Naruto let out a breath, and the pressure vanished. The four Anbu collapsed to the ground, gasping. The one with water in his lungs coughed it all out in a great, hacking spasm. The one trapped in the mud was still stuck, but he was breathing. None of them were dead. None were even seriously injured. It was a demonstration of control so absolute it was more terrifying than any act of destruction. Go back, Naruto told the captain. His voice now holding a resonance, a depth that seemed to echo the vastness behind him. Tell Danzo, the weapon is off its leash. He turned his back on them, facing the now placid sea. The power he had unleashed, the sheer force of his awakening, had done more than just quell a storm. It had put a strain on the very fabric of reality. He could feel it now, a shimmering weakness in the air before him. A tear. It looked like heat haze over a summer road, but it felt like a current in the ocean, a path to somewhere else. And from that somewhere else, he felt a thirst, a profound, aching dryness, a desolate emptiness that called to the boundless life-giving water that now resided in his soul. It was a world of sand and bone, a world without an ocean. A world that needed one. He looked back over his shoulder, at the distant lights of Konoha just beginning to glitter in the twilight. He saw the face of Iruka, of Kakashi, of Tsunade, of Gaara. He felt a pang of loss, a sorrow for the home he was leaving. But he was not that boy anymore. That Naruto had died in the crater, had been buried under the weight of a hero's mantle. This was someone new. He was no longer Uzumaki Naruto of the Hidden Leaf Village. He was the sovereign of a realm without borders, the master of a force that gave life and could just as easily take it away. He took a step, and then another, walking directly toward the shimmering rift. His foot passed through the veil, and for a moment, he saw two realities. The black cliffs and gray sea of his world, and an endless expanse of white sand under a moon that never set. He didn't hesitate. He stepped through, and the current of impossible light folded in on itself, vanishing with a sound like a single drop of water falling into a silent sea. Back on the cliff, the root captain struggled to his feet, his body trembling uncontrollably. He stared at the spot where the village's hero, its greatest asset, had simply vanished from the face of the earth. He had a message to deliver. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very marrow, that Danzo would not understand. No one would. You cannot put a leash on the tide. Far away, so far off, that the concepts of distance and time were almost meaningless. In a void between worlds, a consciousness stirred. It did not have a name, for it was the only thing of its kind. It did not have eyes, but it perceived. It was the silent king, the embodiment of entropy, the patient inevitability of a universe cooling to absolute zero. For eons, it had watched the messy, chaotic anomaly of existence. Life, with its pointless struggles, its noise, its heat, was a flaw in the perfect silence of the void. It had begun its work, sending out extensions of its will, heralds of the void, to gently, quietly erase these pockets of flawed reality. It was not an act of malice. It was an act of correction, of peace. And then, it felt a ripple. It was not the loud, violent tearing of a hollow. It was the arrogant strutting of a Shinigami's Ryutsu. It was not the earthy grit of a human's chakra. It was something else, something primordial, A single point of light had flared into existence, a beacon of such profound, vibrant, affront to everything the Silent King represented. It was the energy of a nascent universe, of Genesis itself, contained within a single being. An ocean had been born where there was once just a pond. The Silent King turned its vast, unseeable attention toward this new, fascinating, and utterly unacceptable anomaly. The correction would have to be accelerated. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Queen of the Wastes. The passage between worlds was not a violent tear, but a silent, fluid parting of reality. For Naruto, it felt like diving into a deep, cool river. One moment, he was standing on the solid rock of his own world, the scent of salt and rain filling his senses. The next, he was submerged in an entirely new sensation, and then he emerged, standing on ground that was utterly alien. He was in a desert of impossible scope. White sand, fine as bone dust, stretched in every direction, meeting a sky of perpetual night. There was no sun, only a cold, unmoving moon that hung like a bleached skull, casting no shadows. The air itself was wrong. It was thin, static, and carried a dry, sterile scent, like a tomb sealed for millennia. There was no wind, no birdsong, no rustle of leaves. Only a profound and oppressive silence. And the thirst. It wasn't a physical thirst in his throat. It was a spiritual, elemental agony. The power that now defined him, the living, breathing soul of the ocean, recoiled from the profound emptiness of this place. The air was saturated with particles he now recognized as reishi, spirit energy, but it was dry, chaotic, and lifeless. It was like breathing dust. His very being, now a conduit for the principle of life-giving water, felt scoured raw by the sheer aridity. This world was dying of thirst. An instinct, deeper and more profound than any thought, rose up in him. It was a reflex, like drawing a breath after being held underwater. He didn't form a hand sign or consciously mold his power. He simply exhaled, and the world changed. From his position at the center, a wave of profound energy radiated outwards. It wasn't destructive, it was creative. The dry reishi in the air, the latent spiritual moisture that had lain dormant for eons, answered his call. The air grew heavy, thick with a humidity it had never known. The fine white sand around his feet darkened as it drank in the sudden dampness. Then, the mist began to form. It swirled around his ankles, then his waist, a living, breathing fog in a land that had forgotten what clouds were. The ground softened. From the damp sand, strange, crystalline trees, like quartz growths, began to sprout. Their branches reaching for the static moon. Dew, glistening and pure, beaded on their crystalline leaves. At the center of it all, where Naruto stood, the sand gave way completely. A pool of water formed, impossibly clear and dark. It wasn't a puddle, it was a spring, bubbling up from a source that wasn't there, fed by the very atmosphere. The pool widened, deepened, becoming a small, tranquil lake in the heart of the endless desert. The silence was broken by the gentle lapping of water against its new shore and the soft dripping of dew from the crystal trees. He had, in his first breath in this new world, created an oasis. The relief was instantaneous and overwhelming. He sank to his knees at the edge of the pool, dipping his hand into the water. It was cool and alive, humming with the very essence of his own power. He felt the oppressive weight of the desert recede, pushed back by the life he had just brought into being. He had created a sanctuary, an embassy of his own nature in a hostile land. He stayed there for a long moment, simply feeling the water, recentering himself in its familiar, life-affirming presence. He was an island of vibe, rant blue and green in an endless sea of white and black. Such an act, so fundamentally alien to the laws of this dimension, could not go unnoticed. In the cavernous throne room of Las Noches, Tier H, Harribel sat on the bone-white seat of power. The throne felt too large, designed for a being of theatrical arrogance, not one of pragmatic leadership. Her reign was new, forged in the ashes of Aizen's betrayal. Her authority was a heavy mantle, worn not for glory, but for the survival of her people. Every decision was weighed against the brutal calculus of existence in Hueco Mundo. What would keep her Arankar, her Fracken, alive for another day? The air in Las Noches was always the same, stagnant, charged with the faint, buzzing energy of the countless hollows that lived and died within its walls. But today, something had changed. It began as a subtle shift, a tremor in the spiritual pressure of the world. It wasn't a hollow being born or a vasto lord powering up. It was something else, a pressure wave that didn't feel like any Ryutsu she had ever known. It was dense, ancient, and wet. Emilo Apache, lounging on the steps below the throne, sat up straight, her usual abrasive energy replaced by a feral alertness. What was that? Did you feel that, Harribel-sama? Francesca Mila rose, leaning against a massive pillar with her arms crossed, pushed herself upright. Her amber eyes narrowed. It's not an enemy, not one I recognize. It doesn't feel like a Shinigami or a hollow. Cyan Sun, standing demurely to the side, her hands tucked into her long sleeves, tilted her head. Her voice was a low, mocking whisper. It feels clean. It's disgusting. Harribel rose from her throne, her golden eyes fixed on the distant horizon, though the fortress walls were kilometers thick. She could feel it more keenly than they could. It was an anomaly, a fundamental contradiction to their entire world. An event of creation in a dimension defined by consumption and decay. It was a power that felt less like an attack and more like a terraforming event. Aizen had sought to reshape the world through destruction. This felt like something else entirely. Something more profound, and perhaps, more dangerous. It came from the Dune of Whispers, Harribel stated, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the alarm she felt. Aizen had craved power, Barrigan had craved dominion, but this was a power that changed the very nature of their reality. A power like that could be a weapon, a prize, or an extinction-level event. She had to know what it was. Apache, Mila rose, Sun, she commanded. Her three Fracken snapped to attention, their bickering personas shed like skin, revealing the deadly predators beneath. With me, we investigate. Full combat readiness. We do not know what we are facing. They didn't need to be told twice. Using Sonido, the four of them vanished in a blur of motion, their combined speed tearing through the sterile atmosphere of the White Desert. Closing the distance to the source of the disturbance in moments. They came to a halt on the crest of a high dune, and what they saw stopped them cold. Below them lay a sight so impossible it bordered on blasphemy. A circle of vibrant life, a kilometer wide, sat in the middle of the desert. A forest of shimmering crystal trees, a thick, rolling mist, and at its heart, a lake of water so pure she looked like a hole torn in the white sand, revealing the night sky beneath. And sitting at the edge of that lake was a single figure. A young man with sun-kissed blonde hair, dressed in simple dark clothing. His hand trailing in the impossible water. He was the source. The entire phenomenon radiated from him, a tranquil but immeasurably vast power that was utterly alien. Mila Rose let out a low whistle. By the king, what in the hell is that? He made this. Apache's voice was a mixture of disbelief and aggression. How? No hollow can create. We consume. We destroy. He is not a hollow, Sun observed. Her snake-like eyes narrowed. And not a Shinigami. There's no Zanpakuto. No scent of the Seraite. He smells alive. Too alive. Harribel's eyes were fixed on the man. He was not emanating Ryutsu in the way she understood it. It was a presence, an environmental pressure, like standing at the bottom of an ocean she had only ever heard of in fragmented memories of her human life. She saw his posture, the calm in his shoulders. He was not on guard. He was at peace. In Hueco Mundo, the contradiction was staggering. This was a power beyond anything Aizen had possessed. Aizen had warped reality with his illusions. But this man had rewritten it. He was a threat of an unknown magnitude. And her first, last, and only duty was to protect her own. Stay here, Harribel ordered her Fracken. Engage only on my signal. With a whisper of Sonido, she appeared at the edge of the mist, her hand resting on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. Naruto didn't startle. He simply lifted his head, his gaze meeting hers across the misty expanse. His eyes were the most startling thing about him. They were a deep, impossible blue, glowing with a soft light, like the heart of a deep sea. They held no malice, no ambition. Only a profound and unnerving calm. This is your doing, Harribel stated. It was not a question. Naruto rose to his feet, water dripping from his fingertips. This world was thirsty, he replied, his voice even. I gave it a drink. The sheer audacity of the statement, delivered with such simple sincerity, was more jarring than any threat. He spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You have trespassed into a sovereign realm, Harribel said, her voice hardening. You have altered it without permission. Identify yourself. State your purpose. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said. As for my purpose, I'm still figuring that out. But I don't think it involves hurting anyone. Apache, never one for patience, had heard enough. Don't listen to him, Harribel-sama. He's a freak. Let's just tear him apart and see what's inside. With a roar, she charged, ignoring Harribel's unspoken command. Mila rose and Sun, loyal to their sister in arms above all else, followed a half-second later. The Tres Besties, a whirlwind of claws, spiritual energy, and killing intent, descended on the tranquil oasis. Idiots, Harribel hissed, but it was too late. The battle had been joined. Apache fired a volley of cerulean energy projectiles from her horn, each one capable of blasting a crater in the desert sand. Mila Rose's powerful fist, glowing with green energy, aimed to pulp him. Sun moved to his flank, her movements serpentine, ready to strike from the blind spot. Naruto watched them come. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even seem to tense. He just lifted a hand. The mist, his mist, answered his will. It swirled and thickened with impossible speed, becoming a dense, disorienting fog. Apache's projectiles flew into the wall of white and vanished with a muffled hiss. Their energy diffused by the super-dense water vapor. Mila Rose, blinded, roared in frustration and charged straight through. She burst out of the fog, her fist just inches from Naruto's face. She smirked, victory assured, but her fist stopped. The sand beneath her feet had turned to a thick, sucking mire. She was sinking, the quicksand he had created clinging to her legs, robbing her of her momentum and leverage. What is this? She bellowed, struggling against the unexpectedly strong grip of the wet sand. Apache, circling around, tried to attack from the air, only to find the air itself fighting her. The moisture condensed around her, heavy and thick, slowing her movements as if she were moving through water. I can't move, she grunted, her powerful sonido reduced to a sluggish drift. Sun was the most cautious. She tried to use her snake-like stealth, but she couldn't hide from him. He didn't need to see her. He could feel the water in her body, a clear and distinct signature in his awareness. Naruto flicked his fingers in her direction. 3 tendrils of water shot out from the lake, silent and fast as snakes. They wrapped around Sun's arms and torso, not crushing her, but holding her firm. The water was as strong as steel cable. She struggled, but the bonds were fluid, absorbing her movements, tightening and loosening with perfect control. In the space of 5 seconds, the fearsome Tres Besties had been utterly and completely neutralized. Without a single punch thrown, without a single drop of blood shed, Naruto stood in the center of it all, his expression unchanged. It was not the face of a victor. It was the face of a man who had tidied up a minor mess. He looked at the 3 captured Arankar, then his glowing blue eyes met Harribel's once more. I told you, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the misty air. I don't want to hurt anyone. Harribel's hand tightened on her zanpakuto until her knuckles were white. This was a display of power so refined, so absolute, it made Aizen's brute force seem clumsy. He hadn't overpowered her Fracken. He had used the environment he created, their own bodies, and his element to simply stop them. It was the difference between a berserker and a grandmaster. This man was infinitely more dangerous than she had first thought. She drew her blade. The massive, shark-tooth-like weapon gleamed in the moonlight. Release them, she commanded, her voice now as cold as the desert night. Naruto nodded. With a subtle gesture, the quicksand solidified, the heavy air thinned, and the water tendrils dissolved. The Tres Besties were free. They stumbled back, panting, their eyes wide with a mixture of fury and a new, unfamiliar fear. Now, Harribel said, taking a step forward onto the damp sand, you will face me. She vanished, her sonido a golden flash. She appeared directly in front of him, her blade swinging in a devastating arc aimed at his neck. It was a strike meant to end the fight before it began. Naruto didn't dodge, he didn't block, he simply took a half step back. At the same time, a column of water erupted from the lake behind him, meeting her blade with a sound like a thunderclap. The water wasn't soft, it was compressed, harder than steel, and it stopped her Zanpakuto dead in its tracks. The impact sent a shockwave through the oasis, kicking up a spray of mist and sand. Harribel's eyes widened in shock. The sheer pressure contained in that column of water was immense. She poured more of her Ryutsu into the strike, trying to force her way through. The water held, buckling slightly but not breaking. Naruto met her gaze over the point of impact. "You're strong," he observed, his voice calm. "You fight to protect them. I can feel it. It's the same reason I fight." He was reading her, analyzing her. Even in the heat of combat, he was trying to understand her. It was unnerving. She pushed off, landing gracefully a dozen meters away. "You know nothing of me or my reasons." "I know what it's like to be a leader," Naruto countered. "To carry the weight of everyone's survival on your shoulders. To be willing to sacrifice anything, even yourself, for their sake." His words struck a chord deep within her, a place of profound loneliness she never allowed anyone to see. The burden of being the queen of Hueco Mundo, the one who must make the hard choices. The one who must stand as the shield for all others. How could this outsider, this boy, possibly understand that? "Do not presume to know me," she snarled, her anger flaring. She raised her sword. "Ervir, Lagoda." She fired a blast of high pressure, scalding water from the tip of her blade. It was one of her signature moves, a concentrated jet of boiling destruction. The jet screamed across the distance. Naruto simply raised his own hand. As Harribel's attack reached him, it didn't explode. It simply stopped. The boiling water merged seamlessly into the cool water of his own oasis, its energy absorbed. Its temperature normalized in an instant. He had taken her attack and made it his own. "Your power is water," Naruto said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "But it's different. Focused. Sharp. Like a blade. Mine is the whole ocean." Harribel stared, her mind reeling. He hadn't just blocked her attack. He had assimilated it. Her control over water was absolute, a core part of her being as an Arankar. Yet he had overridden it as if it were nothing. He was on an entirely different level. She gripped her sword, preparing to release her resurrection. It was her final option, the full extent of her power. If this man could withstand Tiburon, then nothing could. But as she began to utter the release command, a new presence intruded. It was not a feeling of power. It was a feeling of absence. A shadow fell over the oasis, yet there was nothing casting it. The gentle lapping of the lake ceased. The air grew still and cold, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with temperature. A patch of the night sky, darker than the rest, seemed to descend. It was a sphere of absolute blackness, absorbing all light, all sound, all energy. From this sphere of nothingness, a figure emerged. It was vaguely humanoid, but its form was unstable, shifting like black smoke. It had no face, no features, only a smooth, dark surface. It had no Ryutsu. It was a hole in the world, a walking void. Naruto and Harribel both froze. Their conflict instantly forgotten, their senses screaming at this new, utterly wrong presence. The Tres Bestias backed away, their predatory instincts overwhelmed by a primal fear. This was not a hollow. This was not a soul. This was an anti-soul. The Void Herald, a scout of the Silent King, had arrived. The creature turned its featureless head toward the oasis. The greatest concentration of life energy for 1,000 miles. It raised a smoky arm, and a wave of silent energy washed over the area. It wasn't an attack, it was an attempt at erasure. The crest, aligned trees began to crumble into gray dust. The vibrant green moss withered, turning black and brittle. The edge of the lake began to recede, the water not evaporating, but simply ceasing to be. The herald was unmaking Naruto's creation. Naruto felt it as a physical pain, a part of his very soul being nullified. A surge of protective anger, cold and deep, rose within him. He would not let this thing destroy his sanctuary. Harribel reacted just as quickly, her pragmatism overriding her fear. This new entity was a threat to her world, an unknown variable that had to be eliminated. She pointed the tip of her Zanpakuto at the herald and chanted, "Sero." A brilliant, golden beam of energy shot from her sword, screaming through the air. It was a blast of pure destructive force. The Sero slammed into the herald's chest, and was swallowed. The black, smoky surface of the creature rippled, but it did not explode. The massive amount of energy from the Sero was simply absorbed into its form, vanishing without a trace. The creature didn't even flinch. Harribel's eyes widened. Apache gasped, "It ate her Sero." The herald, having absorbed the energy, turned its attention to the one who had fired it. It drifted toward Harribel, its silence more terrifying than any roar. Naruto moved. He appeared between Harribel and the creature in a swirl of mist. "Get back," he ordered, not looking at her. "It feeds on that kind of energy." "And what do you propose we do, outsider?" Harribel snapped, though she held her ground beside him. For the first time, they were facing the same direction, a temporary, unspoken truce forged in the face of a common enemy. "Energy isn't the only way to fight," Naruto said. He clapped his hands together. "Let's see how it handles pressure." He thrust his palms forward. The entirety of the lake rose up behind him, a colossal wall of water that blotted out the moon. It converged on the Void Herald, not as a wave, but as a solid, crushing mass. The water compressed around the creature, forming a sphere of liquid the size of a house, the pressure at its core immense enough to pulverize diamond. For a moment, it seemed to work. The herald's form was squeezed, distorted. But then, the water touching its surface began to vanish, turning to nothingness, creating a void within the sphere of pressure. The creature was unmaking the water as fast as Naruto could apply it. "It's erasing the water." Mila Rose yelled in disbelief. "It's not just destroying it," Naruto said, his brow furrowed in concentration. He could feel the nothingness spreading. "It's negating its existence. It's a conceptual attack." Harribel's sharp mind processed this instantly. A conceptual enemy, something that fought not with power, but with its very nature. How do you fight an enemy that represents nothing? "Then we cannot give it a single concept to attack," she declared. She looked at Naruto. "Your water holds it in place. My energy is too direct. But what if they are combined?" Naruto glanced at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "A distraction and a pinpoint strike. Your pressure is a blunt instrument," Harribel said, her tone all business. "Can you make it a blade?" Naruto grinned, a flash of his old self. "I can make it anything I want." He changed his focus. The massive sphere of water collapsed, but reformed instantly into a dozen high-speed, swirling drills of water, each one spinning with incredible force. They slammed into the herald from all sides, not trying to crush it, but to disorient it, to give it a multitude of physical threats to negate at once. The herald's smoky form flickered as it tried to unmake the dozen simultaneous attacks. It was being overwhelmed, its focus split. "Now!" Naruto yelled. Harribel was already moving. She raised her left hand, gathering golden energy not for a wide-beam Sero, but for something far more focused. A small, brilliant orb of destructive power. She didn't fire it. At the same time, Naruto thrust his hand forward. A jet of water, thin as a needle and moving at hypersonic speed, shot from his palm. "Merge," Harribel commanded. Her orb of Sero attached itself to the tip of Naruto's water jet. The result was an attack neither of them could have created alone. It was a needle of pure physical force, its tip armed with a payload of conceptual destruction. It wasn't just water or energy, it was a fusion of both. The combined attack struck the Void Herald dead center. The creature's ability to negate was absolute, but it could only negate one concept at a time. Faced with an attack that was both a physical object and pure energy simultaneously, its very nature stuttered. It could not process the contradiction. For a fraction of a second, the herald froze. And in that moment, the attack pierced its form. There was no explosion, no sound. Instead, the herald imploded. The golden energy of the Sero ignited from within, and the physical pressure of the water jet caused it to collapse in on itself. The creature folded into a single, infinitesimal point of blackness and then vanished, leaving behind nothing but a lingering chill in the air. Silence returned to the oasis. The three Fracken stared at the empty space. Then at Naruto and Harribel, who stood side by side, panting slightly. They killed it," Apache whispered, her voice laced with awe. Naruto let his water drills fall, the liquid returning to the lake, which was now half its original size. He looked at Harribel, a new respect in his eyes. Her tactical mind was as sharp as her blade. Harribel looked back at him. This outsider, this Naruto Uzumaki, was not a conqueror. He was not a mindless force of destruction. He was a power unlike any she had ever encountered, and in the space of a minute, they had fought. With a synergy she had only ever shared with her Tres Bestias. He had protected her, and he had trusted her strategy without question. The truce was no longer temporary. The ground had shifted. What was that thing? She asked, her voice losing its icy edge, replaced by a grim curiosity. Naruto looked at the spot where the herald had vanished, a deep unease settling in his gut. He had felt a glimpse of the mind behind it when their powers connected. A vast, cold, and silent intelligence that considered their very existence a flaw. A scout, Naruto said, his voice low and serious. And I think, it was the reason I was brought here. Quote, he turned to face her fully, his glowing blue eyes holding hers. The animosity was gone, replaced by the weight of a shared, terrifying discovery. You are the leader of this world, right? He asked. Harribel straightened, her regal bearing returning. I am Harribel, the Queen of Hueco Mundo. Then, Queen of Hueco Mundo, Naruto said, his tone one of equal standing. A sovereign addressing another. I think you and I need to talk. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Void. The walk back to Las Noches was a study in silence. A tense, brittle, quiet that was a universe away from the tranquil stillness of Naruto's oasis. He walked beside Harribel, the kilometer-wide circle of life he had created shrinking behind them as they moved deeper into the oppressive, bone-white desert. The air grew thin and sterile again, the spiritual thirst of Hueco Mundo clawing at his senses. He endured it, a dull ache that was a constant reminder of how fundamentally wrong this place was. The Tres Bestias trailed behind them, a volatile mix of simmering fury and grudging respect. Apache shot him glares that were practically physical blows, her hand never straying far from the hilt of her weapon. She muttered under her breath, a stream of curses that the dead calm air did nothing to muffle. Mila Rose was quieter, her powerful arms crossed over her chest. Her amber eyes watching him with a calculating intensity. She had felt his power, the effortless way he had neutralized her, and her brawler's mind was trying to dissect it, to find a weakness, and was coming up empty. Sun, as ever, was the most unnerving. She glided behind them, her expression unreadable, her snake-like eyes missing nothing. She saw not just the power, but the control. And control, in a world built on chaotic hunger, was the most terrifying thing of all. Naruto paid them little mind. His attention was on the woman walking beside him. She moved with a liquid grace that seemed to defy the static world around her, a predator in her natural element. Her zanpakuto was sheathed, but her posture was coiled, ready to explode into motion at the slightest provocation. Yet, it was not the posture of an enemy anymore. It was the posture of a wary ally, someone who had just looked into the same abyss he had and was now forced to acknowledge their shared predicament. That thing, she said, her voice low, not turning to look at him. You called it a scout. You've seen them before. No, not like that, Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the impossibly large structure that was beginning to dominate the horizon. It looked less like a building and more like a mountain range carved from a single, massive bone. Las Noches. But I felt what was behind it. An intelligence. Cold, vast, and quiet. It didn't want to fight us. It wanted to erase us. Like we're a mistake in its perfect silence. Harribel considered his words. Perfect silence. It was a chillingly apt description. PTION for the sensation she had felt when the Void Herald appeared. It was the antithesis of a hollow's being, which was defined by the roaring emptiness of its hunger. This was a silence that was full, a presence of absolute nothingness. This world has seen would-be gods and self-proclaimed kings, Harribel stated, her tone flat. Aizen Sosuke believed he could sit on the throne of heaven. Bara, Gon Luzenbairn believed he was the embodiment of time and death itself. They were all arrogant fools who could be fought, who could be bled. This feels different. It is, Naruto affirmed. They wanted to rule. This thing wants nothing to exist at all. Ahead, the entrance to Las Noches loomed, a cavernous opening in the monolithic white wall. Other Arankar, drawn by the distant energy flare, watched from the shadows. Their spiritual pressures were a cacophony of different notes, curiosity, hostility, fear. They saw their queen returning, Not with a prisoner in chains, but with an outsider walking beside her as an equal. The whispers started instantly, slithering through the sterile halls like sun snakes. They passed through the gate and into the fortress proper. The interior was a dizzying, Escher-like construction of white walls, stark shadows, and endless corridors. It was a place built to disorient and intimidate, a monument to Aizen's manipulative ego. Naruto, however, felt no awe. He simply looked around, his new senses mapping the structure, feeling the flow of reishi through its walls, the location of its inhabitants. He felt like he was walking through a diagram. "It's big," he commented, his voice echoing slightly in the vast passage. The simple observation seemed to throw Harribel off more than any expression of fear or wonder would have. She glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her golden eyes. It was the palace of a tyrant with an inflated sense of self. "Looks like it," Naruto agreed easily. They arrived in the throne room, the same cavern. Out space where Harribel had first sensed his arrival. It was empty now, save for them. The throne, stark and white, sat on its high dais, a symbol of a lonely power. Harribel ascended the steps and turned to face him, once again assuming the mantle of queen. She was no longer the ally from the desert, but the sovereign of this realm, reasserting her authority. "Naruto Uzumaki," she declared, her voice resonating with regal authority. "You are an unknown quantity. Your power is a threat to the stability of Hueco Mundo. That creature we fought is also a threat. For now, our interests align. You will be housed within Las Noches, where I can observe you. You will be given guest quarters, but you will be under guard. You will not leave the fortress without my permission. Are these terms acceptable?" It was a test, an assertion of her dominance. The old Naruto would have bristled, would have shouted about not being a prisoner. But the man who stood before her was not that boy. He understood the necessity of her position. He saw the caution in her eyes and recognized it as the burden of a leader, not the arrogance of a jailer. He gave a slight nod. "Fair enough. Your house, your rules." He then met her gaze, his own glowing blue eyes holding a power that was not challenging, but absolute. "But let's be clear, Harribel. I am your guest, not your prisoner. I'm here to help you fight a war you didn't know you were in. The moment you treat me like a captive, this alliance is over." The Tres Bastias tensed, ready for her command to attack him for his audacity. But Harribel simply held his gaze for a long moment, a silent negotiation passing between two sovereigns. She saw no deception in his eyes, only a calm, unshakable certainty. He was yielding to her authority on a superficial level while establishing their fundamental equality. It was a masterful political maneuver, and she found herself respecting it. "The terms are understood," she said finally, giving a slight nod of her own. "Apache, Mila Rose, Sun. Show our guest to the eastern guest wing. Ensure he is comfortable. And post a guard, 2 of my best. He is not to be disturbed, nor is he to wander." The Tres Bastias looked ready to argue, but a single sharp glance from Harribel silenced them. With ill-disguised reluctance, they gestured for Naruto to follow. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Before I go," he said, looking back at Harribel. "That empty feeling from the creature. The way it just unmade things. Is there any of it left? A residue? A trace?" Harribel frowned. "There was nothing. It simply vanished. Nothing physical," Naruto corrected. "But an act like that leaves a scar. Not on the world, but on the energy of the world. I need to see the place where it died. I might be able to learn something." The request was strange, but his reasoning was sound. If they were to fight this enemy, they needed to understand it. "Very well," Harribel conceded. "Tomorrow. For now, rest. You are new to this world. Its air is not kind to those with vibrant life." Naruto nodded his thanks and followed the still grumbling Fracken out of the throne room, leaving Harribel alone with her thoughts. She sank onto her throne, the cold bone pressing against her back. An outsider who could create life. A monster made of nothingness. Her world, which had just found a fragile stability, was now poised on the brink of a conflict far greater than any war with the Soul Society. And at the center of it all was the blonde-haired young man with the eyes of the ocean. Guest or prisoner, ally or threat, she knew one thing for certain. Naruto Uzumaki was going to change everything. The depths of Las Noches were a labyrinth, a place where entire ecosystems of hollows could exist without ever seeing the pale moon. In a forgotten coliseum, once used for brutal gladiatorial matches under Barragan's reign, a group of powerful Arrancar had gathered. They were the Old Guard, warriors who chafed under Harribel's rule. They saw her focus on stability and protection as weakness, a betrayal of the true nature of a hollow, which was to devour, to evolve, to dominate. At their center stood Greer, a towering Arrancar whose hollow mask fragments formed a brutal, jaw-like structure around his neck and shoulders. His past life as a Vasto Lord was evident in his immense spiritual pressure, a heavy, suffocating force that commanded respect through sheer intimidation. His arms were crossed over his massive chest, his crimson eyes scanning the faces of the assembled dissidents. "She brings an outsider into our halls." Greer's voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together. An unknown, walking beside her as an equal. After a mere skirmish, she forms an alliance. Is this the queen you want to follow? One who seeks help from other worlds instead of relying on our own strength. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Barragan Sama would have crushed the whelp, taken his power for himself. Another Arrancar, a lean, wolf-like warrior named Findor, sneered. That is the way of Hueco Mundo. The strong consume the weak. Harribel has forgotten this. She coddles the weak, preaches sacrifice. Sacrifice is for prey, not for predators. And what was this creature they fought? A third asked, a bulky, four-armed Arrancar who had been one of Barragan's personal guards. The energy signature was gone in an instant. But the void it left behind, it was unsettling. Greer's lips curled into a cruel smile. It was a test, and she failed it. She required the outsider's help to win. It proves her inadequacy. He stepped forward, his spiritual pressure flaring, forcing the lesser Arrancar to their knees. The time for her reign of weakness is over. Las Noches needs a true king. One who understands that power is the only law. Quote, as he spoke, a thought that was not his own whispered in the back of his mind. It was a cold, silent suggestion, promising him the power he craved. She is an anomaly. The outsider is a greater one. They represent a flaw in the natural order. Erase the flaw. Restore the order. True power lies not in struggling, but in silence. Greer's eyes widened slightly. He had been feeling these whispers for days, a subtle influence promising him dominion if he would only sow chaos. He had thought it was his own ambition speaking. Now, he recognized it as something else. A patron. A new source of power far greater than anything Eisen had offered. It told him that Harribel's path of life and sacrifice was a dead end. The true path was to embrace the coming silence, to become its herald. He mistook the void for the ultimate form of predatory emptiness. The queen is compromised, Greer declared, his voice now filled with a fanatical certainty. She consorts with the living. She brings the filth of creation into our world of consumption. We will correct this. We will purge Las Noches of her weakness, and of the outsider. And he paused, letting his power wash over them. Will take the throne. The assembled Arrancar roared their approval. The coup had its leader. The whispers of the void had found their champion. The next day, Naruto stood once more in the white desert. At the spot where the void herald had died. The oasis he had created was still there. A vibrant jewel in the distance, but he had ordered it to remain, a static sanctuary for now. Harribel stood several meters away, her fracken forming a wary perimeter. There was nothing to see. The sand was undisturbed, the air was sterile. To anyone else, it was just another patch of empty desert. But Naruto could feel it. He closed his eyes, shutting out the bleak landscape, and focused his new senses. He reached out with his power, not with water, but with the principle of life that animated it. He felt for the whole. And he found it. A patch of reality that was numb. It was a conceptual scar tissue, a place where the universe had been unmade and then hastily stitched back together. It radiated a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of absolute absence. It's here, he murmured. He knelt down, placing his palm flat against the sand, not touching the grains. But the space they occupied. He pushed his consciousness into the scar. The world dissolved. He was no longer in Hueco Mundo. He was nowhere. He was adrift in a silent, starless cosmos. There was no up or down, no light. No sound. Below him, or above, or beside him, was a single, monolithic thought. It was not a creature of flesh or spirit. It was a being of pure, dispassionate intellect. Its consciousness a gravity well that pulled all things toward a state of perfect, crystalline stillness. This was the Silent King. Naruto felt his own consciousness, his very sense of self, being drawn into that immense, quiet mind. He felt the king's purpose, not as a thought, but as a fundamental truth of its existence. Life is noise. Thought is friction. Emotion is a fever. Existence is a flaw. The cure is silence. The cure is nothingness. He saw visions, not of conquest or destruction, but of peace. A star winking out, not in a violent supernova, but gently fading, its heat given up to the perfect cold. A planet's frantic biosphere slowing, the chaotic struggle for survival ending as every living thing lay down to a final, dreamless sleep. He felt the appeal of it, the seductive promise of an end to all struggle. All pain, all loneliness. You are so tired, little anomaly, the king's thought echoed, not in words, but in pure concept. You have fought so hard. For what? For a world that fears you. For people who use you. For a cycle of hatred that will never end. Lay down your burden. Be still. Be silent. Be at peace. The pull was immense. He felt his own vibrant energy, the soul of the ocean within him, beginning to cool. The memories of Konoha's fickle adoration, of Danzo's cold machinations, of his own profound loneliness after the battle with pain, the king used it all as fuel for its argument. The void was offering him an escape he hadn't even realized he craved. Just as the edges of his consciousness began to fray, to dissolve into the silent black, a new sensation pierced the void. It was sharp, golden, and fiercely protective. It was the memory of Harribel's Ryutsu as she stood beside him, her determination a burning flame against the cold. It was the feeling of her pragmatic resolve, her unwavering will to protect her own, no matter the cost. It was a will to live, not for a grand philosophy, but for the simple, fierce love of her people. That spark of another's will was an anchor. Naruto clung to it. His power, the boundless, chaotic, life-giving ocean, surged back. No, he projected back, his own thought a raging storm against the silent sea. Struggle is life. Pain is proof of existence. Connection is the purpose. You are not peace. You are oblivion. He ripped his consciousness away from the scar, the psychic backlash hitting him like a physical blow. He collapsed onto the sand, gasping, a single trickle of blood running from his nose. The world of white sand and black sky slammed back into his senses. Naruto. The voice was sharp, alarmed. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and a surge of golden Ryutsu, not attacking him, but shielding him, pushing back the lingering cold of the void. He looked up into Harribel's face. She was kneeling over him, her usual stoic mask replaced by a look of genuine concern. Her Frakken were rushing forward, their own alarm clear. What did you see? Harribel demanded, her grip on his shoulder firm, grounding him. Naruto pushed himself up, wiping the blood from his lip. He was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer psychic strain. Everything, he rasped, his voice raw. I saw it. The enemy. It's a cosmic entity, a being that wants to turn everything off. And it's not just here. It's looking at my world, too. At all worlds. He finally understood. He hadn't been brought to Hueco Mundo by accident. He was an antibody, a force of life drawn to a spreading infection of absolute death. The gravity of his words settled over them. This was no longer about defending Hueco Mundo. This was about defending existence itself. Later that evening, the tension in Las Noches had a new, sharper edge. Naruto sat in his assigned quarters, a spacious but Spartan room carved from the same white material as the rest of the fortress. He was meditating, not to gather energy, but to calm the turbulent sea of his own soul after its brush with the void. The memory of that absolute silence was a scar on his mind. A soft knock came at his door. He didn't need to answer. He could feel the spiritual pressure on the other side. It was Harribel, alone. Come in, he said. The door slid open, and she entered, her Frakken nowhere in sight. She was out of her usual combat attire, wearing a simpler, form-fitting black garment that was still practical but less regal. It was the first time he had seen H.R. without the full armor of her queenship. She looked at the room, then at him, her golden eyes unreadable. My Fracken are busy, she said, as if sensing his unspoken question. They are reassessing their opinion of you. Neutralizing them was one thing. Standing against that creature and surviving its mental assault is another. I'm full of surprises, Naruto said with a tired smile. She walked further into the room, her gaze falling on a small puddle of water on the floor near him. It was swirling gently, a miniature whirlpool, a subconscious manifestation of his turbulent thoughts. You are a paradox, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. You carry a power of creation, of life itself. Yet you choose to come to a world that is its complete opposite. Why? Naruto looked up at her. The question was genuine, not an interrogation. I didn't have a choice. It felt like this place needed me. And after what I saw today, I think I was right. He paused, then asked a question of his own. Why do you do it? All of this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the fortress, the burden of her crown. You could be the strongest. You could rule through fear, like the others you mentioned. But you don't. Harribel's expression tightened. The strong have a duty to protect the weak. My Fracken, my Urankar, they are my responsibility. I am their shield. That is all. It was her mantra, the creed she lived by. Naruto saw the profound loneliness in that statement. The shield is always the one taking the hits. The shield is always in front, alone. He understood that loneliness better than anyone. He looked at her, at the tension in her shoulders that never seemed to leave, the constant vigilance in her eyes. He saw the queen, but he also saw the woman beneath, carrying a weight that would crush most others. An impulse, born of empathy and his own elemental nature, moved him. He lifted his hand. The water on the floor rose into the air, coalescing. He didn't purify it or change it. He reached into his own soul, drawing forth the very essence of his power, the concept of pure, life-giving water. The liquid shimmered, and then reformed, not in a complex shape, but as a simple, elegant glass, filled with water so clear it seemed to capture the faint light of the room. A fine mist of condensation immediately bloomed on its surface. He held it out to her. A silent offering. Harribel stared at the glass. It was such a simple thing. A glass of water. But in Hueco Mundo, it was a miracle. It was a gift of something that did not exist here. It was life, cool and pure, held in a vessel of the same. It was a piece of him, of his world, of his very soul, offered freely. Her hand, the one that had wielded a blade against him only a day ago, led slightly as she reached out and took the glass. Her fingers brushed against his, and a jolt of warmth, of vibrant life, passed between them. It was a shocking contrast to the cold sterility of her world and her existence. She looked from the glass to his face. His glowing blue eyes held no agenda, no ulterior motive. Only a quiet, profound understanding. He wasn't looking at the Queen of Hueco Mundo. He was looking at her. You never stop, do you? He said softly. Even here, in my room, you're still the shield. Slowly, she raised the glass to her lips. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then drank. The water was cool, clean, and felt more real than anything she had ever tasted. It was not just a liquid, it was a concept. It was the feeling of rain on skin, of a deep river flowing, of a living world. It was an antidote to the endless thirst of her home. As she swallowed, she felt a quiet place inside her, a part she had thought long dead, stir with a warmth she had forgotten was possible. She lowered the glass, her golden eyes locking with his. The walls between them, the titles of queen and outsider, the suspicion and the caution, had not vanished, but for the first time, a door had opened within them. In that quiet moment, sharing a simple glass of water, an alliance of necessity began to transform into a bond of genuine connection. They were two lonely sovereigns, from two different worlds, who had just discovered they were not, in fact, alone. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Crimson Tide and the Golden Queen. The stillness in Las Noches was a lie. It was the deceptive calm of a high-pressure system. A silence stretched taut over a brewing storm. Naruto felt it in the very air, in the subtle shifts of spiritual pressure that scurried through the fortress's endless corridors. The ambient curiosity of the Urankar had curdled into something sharper, something conspiratorial. He felt it as a dissonance in his oceanic awareness, pockets of agitated, hostile energy gathering like storm clouds in the otherwise stagnant atmosphere. He stood with Harribel on a high balcony overlooking the vast, white desert. The ever-present moon cast its sterile light over the sands. Since their shared moment of understanding, a subtle change had settled between them. The formal distance of two sovereigns had been replaced by the quiet comfort of soldiers who had seen he same enemy and recognized the same steel in each other's eyes. "They're plotting," Naruto said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. His gaze was distant, as if he were listening to a conversation happening leagues away. "The big one, the one with the mask like a jawbone around his neck. Greer. He's the center of it." Harribel's hand rested on the hilt of her sheathed zanpakuto. She did not seem surprised. Disappointed, perhaps, but not surprised. Greer was one of Barragan's enforcers. He believes in the old ways. The strong devour the weak philosophy. My reign is anathema to him. He sees my desire to protect as a weakness to be exploited. "It's not weakness," Naruto countered, his voice low but firm. He turned to look at her, the soft glow of his eyes illuminating the sharp planes of her face. "It's the only thing that gives strength any meaning. Power for its own sake is just a tantrum." Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment, the Queen of the Wastes looked weary. "That is a truth this world has forgotten. Aizen taught them that power is a tool for ambition. Barragan taught them it is a tool for dominion. They do not understand that it can also be a shield. Then we'll have to remind them," Naruto said simply. A sudden, sharp spike of Ryutsu flared from the direction of the throne room. It was Apache's. A desperate, furious signal. It was followed an instant later by Mila Rose's. A roaring challenge, and then Sun's, a cold, sharp note of alarm. Harribel was already moving before the first echo of the signal faded. "They've made their move," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. She didn't even say his name. She didn't have to. With a golden flash of Sonito, she was gone. Naruto did not use Sonito. He didn't need to. He simply stepped back from the balcony. And the moisture in the air coalesced around him, forming a swirling current of mist and water. He sank into it, his form dissolving. The current then shot through the fortress, not bound by corridors or walls. A stream of pure will flowing through the very architecture of Las Noches towards the sound of battle. It was faster than Sonito, more direct. A river finding the shortest path to the sea. He emerged in the throne room a half-second after Harribel, coalescing from a cloud of mist just behind her. The scene was one of chaos. The Tres Bastias were back-to-back in the center of the room, fighting with a desperate, feral grace. They were surrounded. At least 30 Urankar, led by the towering form of Greer, had sealed the exits. Findor, the wolf-like Urankar, was pressing the attack on Mila Rose. His movements fast and vicious. Others were launching coordinated Sero blasts, forcing Sun and Apache into a purely defensive battle. Greer, Harribel's voice cut through the din of battle like a shard of ice. All fighting stopped. The rebel Urankar turned, their eyes a mixture of defiance and fear, to face their queen. Greer stepped forward, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. He was holding a strange, dark object in his hand, a shard of obsidian that seemed to drink the light. It pulsed with the same chilling emptiness Naruto had felt from the Void Herald. "Harribel," Greer boomed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your pathetic reign is over. You brought a stain of life into our world, allied yourself with an outsider. You are unfit. Las Noches requires a king who embraces its nature, who is not afraid of the power offered by the true void." As he spoke, he crushed the obsidian shard in his fist. Black, smoky energy, the very essence of the Silent King's power, enveloped him. It was not a mask release. It was a corruption. His spiritual pressure skyrocketed, becoming heavy, distorted, and utterly alien. Black markings, like creeping frost, spread across his skin. His eyes began to glow with a cold, dead light. "The Silent King has shown me the truth," Greer roared, his voice now a dissonant chorus of his own and something far older and colder. "Existence is a flaw, and you, with your obsession with protecting and living, are its most glaring error. We will purge you, and then we will offer this world to the perfect, final silence." The other rebels, emboldened by their leader's transformation, raised their own weapons, their ryutsu flaring with a tainted, dark energy. They had been given similar, smaller tokens of the void's power. This was not just a coup. It was a holy war. So, the whispers found a mouthpiece, Naruto said calmly from beside Harribel. He looked at Greer, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. You traded your soul for an echo. Bad deal. Greer's void-touched eyes snapped to Naruto. The anomaly. You are the source of this plague of life. I will have the pleasure of personally unmaking you. With a roar, Greer charged. He was impossibly fast, his sonito now a smear of black static. He appeared before them, his massive fist, wreathed in void energy, swinging for Harribel's head. Harribel met the attack, her blade a blur of gold. The impact was titanic. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact, cracking the floor and sending dust and debris flying. Harribel was driven back a single step, her eyes wide with shock at the sheer physical force behind the blow. Greer was now stronger than she was. See, Greer taunted. This is true power, not your tepid sacrifices. Naruto moved. He didn't attack Greer directly. He swept his arm in a wide arc. From the very walls and air of the throne room, he pulled the latent moisture. It formed a massive, swirling wave, not of water, but of thick, heavy mist. The wave didn't crash. It descended, blanketing the entire throne room floor. The rebel Arankar suddenly found their footing treacherous. Their sonito movements became sluggish and unpredictable as the mist-slicked floor offered no purchase. They were fighting in a frictionless environment. The floor, Findor snarled, sliding ungracefully into a pillar. What did he do? He's controlling the battlefield. Mila Rose roared, a savage grin spreading across her face as she easily kept her footing. She launched a counterattack, her powerful kicks and punk. He's landing with brutal efficiency on her now clumsy opponents. Apache cackled, unleashing a Sero that sent a group of rebels sliding into each other like bowling pins. Nice trick, Blondie. Sun used the chaos, her lithe form weaving through the disoriented rebels, her snake-like strikes disabling them with precise blows to their joints. The tide of the larger battle had turned in an instant, not through overwhelming power, but through tactical genius. Naruto hadn't fought the enemy, he had changed the ground they fought on. But the main threat remained. Greer, ignoring his floundering subordinates, pressed his attack on Harribel. His new power made him a physical juggernaut, and his void-infused strikes were chipping away at her defenses. For every blow she parried, she had to expend more energy to prevent the void stuff from corroding her blade. Naruto appeared at her side. "Buy me a second," he said. Harribel didn't need to ask why. She trusted him. With a powerful roar, she unleashed a wave of golden ryutsu, forcing Greer back several paces. "Proyectil Azul," she yelled, firing a rapid volley of condensed Sero blasts from her sword, not to damage him, but to keep him occupied. In that second, Naruto clapped his hands together. He wasn't gathering water. He was gathering pressure. He focused on Greer, on the air around him, compressing it, making it heavier, denser. Greer felt it as a sudden, immense weight, as if the entire sky had fallen on his shoulders. His movements, once lightning fast, became labored. Each step felt like wading through setting concrete. "What is this sorcery?" he growled, straining against the invisible force. "It's called atmospheric pressure," Naruto said, walking calmly toward him, Harribel falling into step on his other side. "There's about 15 pounds of it on every square inch of you. I just quadrupled it. In your immediate vicinity." Greer roared in fury and tried to unleash a Sero Ascuras, the signature black Sero of a released Espada. But the void energy sputtered and died. The immense pressure was suffocating the formation of the energy, crushing it before it could be released. He was a shark trapped in a block of ice. His immense power was useless, contained by a force he couldn't see or fight. "It's over, Greer," Harribel said, her voice cold. She leveled the tip of her blade at his throat. "Surrender. Tell me who else gave you those trinkets." Greer's eyes, burning with the cold light of the void, locked on her. A horrifying, cracking smile spread across his face. "The king has no trinkets. Only gifts. And his final gift is peace." The void energy within him, denied an external release, turned inward. It began to consume him. His body distorted, bloating like a drowned corpse. Black energy poured from his eyes and mouth. He was turning himself into a conceptual bomb. He's going to detonate. Harribel yelled, her eyes wide with alarm. The sheer amount of void energy he was about to release would not just destroy the throne room. It would likely unmake a significant portion of Las Noches itself. There was no time to escape. No time to contain it. Naruto's expression became one of absolute, cold resolve. No, he said, his voice a command that brooked no argument. He stepped in front of Harribel, shielding her with his body. He raised both hands towards the imploding Greer. He didn't erect a barrier of water or chakra. He did something far more fundamental. He took control. The water inside Greer's body, the 70% of him that was still, fundamentally, biological, answered Naruto's call. It was a war of concepts fought in the traitor's very cells. The void was trying to unmake him. Naruto was using his own body's water to hold him together. Greer's form flickered violently, between his physical self and a roaring vortex of black energy. Veins of pure, glowing blue light, Naruto's power, spread across Greer's skin, a network of life battling a cancer of nothingness. Your body is mine, Naruto grunted, sweat beading on his forehead from the sheer strain. He was fighting a primordial force for ownership of a single man's life. You will not detonate. You will not harm her. You will not harm anyone. With a final, desperate roar, the void energy surged. But Naruto's will was absolute. He squeezed his fists, and the water in Greer's body flash froze. Not into normal ice, but into a crystalline state of incredible density and pressure. The explosion was snuffed out from the inside. Greer's body was instantly encased, and then crushed inward, by the freezing, high-pressure water from his own cells. He didn't explode. He imploded into a shower of frozen, black dust and ice crystals that fell to the floor with a soft hiss. The throne room fell silent. The remaining rebels, who had been picked apart by the Tres Bastias, stared in absolute horror. Their void-empowered leader, a being of immense power, had been dismantled from the inside out, turned into a weapon against himself. Naruto stood panting. The immense pressure he had been exerting released. The tension broke. He stumbled back a step, and Harribel was there, her hand catching his arm, steadying him. Are you all right? She asked, her voice tight with concern. The sheer power and control he had just demonstrated was beyond anything she had imagined. He hadn't just killed Greer, he had denied the void its victory on a conceptual level. I'm fine, Naruto breathed, straightening up. He looked at the terrified faces of the remaining rebels. Just tired of fanatics. The victory was absolute. The coup was crushed. The survivors dropped their weapons, their borrowed power fading, leaving them shivering and weak. They fell to their knees, not in defiance, but in utter, soul-crushing defeat. They hadn't just been beaten. They had witnessed a power that operated on a level they couldn't even comprehend. Later, as the prisoners were being secured, Harribel and Naruto stood in the now ruined throne room. The Tres Bastias were nearby, their wounds being tended to, but their eyes kept flicking back to Naruto with a new, complex emotion. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was awe. You saved us, Harribel said, her voice quiet. You saved Las Noches. We saved it, Naruto corrected her, meeting her gaze. Your trust gave me the time I needed. We work well together. That was an understatement. In the heat of battle, they had moved like two halves of a single mind. His fluid, controlling power was the perfect complement to her sharp, decisive offense. He was the unshakable foundation, she was the lightning strike. The weight of the day, the intensity of the fight, and the terrifying glimpse of the enemy's influence settled between them. The stakes were higher than ever. The Silent King wasn't just a distant threat. It was actively recruiting, whispering in the shadows, turning her own people against her. This changes things, Harribel said, her gaze sweeping over the damage. Quote, this isn't just your fight or my fight anymore. The enemy is in my home. It is turning my people into weapons. This is our war now. Naruto nodded. It's been our war since I landed here. But fighting it in pieces, a battle here, a skirmish there, it's not enough. This thing is a cosmic threat. We need more than just the Urankar. We need more than just me. He looked at her, a bold, audacious plan forming in his mind. He was done reacting. It was time to build an army. Your world is built on consumption. Mine is built on conflict. But there are others, other powers, other worlds. We saw it with that scout. It's targeting everything. He took a step closer, his voice dropping, filled with a new, urgent conviction. We need an alliance. A real one. Shinobi, Arankar, maybe even the Shinigami. If we can convince them they're not above it all. It was a mad proposal. The Shinigami were their sworn enemies. The shinobi of his world would see her as a monster. But in the face of an enemy that wanted to erase existence itself. Old grudges seemed petty, insignificant. You want to bring me, the Queen of Hollows, to your world? Harribel asked, the sheer insanity of the idea evident in her tone. No, Naruto said, his glowing blue eyes intense. I want to bring my partner to meet her new allies. The word hung in the air between them. Partner. It was more than ally. It was more than friend. It was a statement of absolute equality, of a shared purpose and a shared fate. He was formally inviting her not just into a war, but into his world, into his life. He was trusting her, the monster queen, completely. It was a leap of faith more profound than stepping between dimensions. Harribel looked at him, at the unwavering sincerity in his eyes. She saw the ruins of her throne room, evidence of betrayal born from a philosophy she was trying to fight. She saw the memory of the void, the promise of utter annihilation. And she saw this man, this impossible paradox of immense power and profound empathy. Offering her not a subordinate role, but a seat at his side. A slow smile, the first genuine, unguarded smile he had ever seen from her, touched her lips. It transformed her face, melting the icy mask of the queen and revealing the fierce, beautiful woman beneath. All right, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice holding a new warmth, a new strength. Let's go meet your allies. I hope, for their sake, they are more sensible than mine. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A World of Green and Blue. The journey back to the elemental nations was nothing like the chaotic tear that had brought Naruto to Hueco Mundo. This time, it was a deliberate, controlled act. Naruto stood before Harribel and her assembled Fracken at the edge of his oasis, the only place in the White Desert where he walls between worlds felt thin and pliable. He didn't need to search for a rift, he was the rift. He extended his hand, and the air before him began to shimmer, not with heat, but with the deep, cool azure of his own power. A vertical line of light appeared, widening into a shimmering, fluid doorway. On the other side was not the black cliffs where he had left, but a place his senses now told him was teeming with life. A place where his power would be magnified 1,000-fold. The land of water. It was a strategic choice. Arriving in the land of fire would be seen as a direct challenge to Konoha. Arriving here, in the domain of the Mizukage, was a statement of neutrality and independent power. The passage is stable, Naruto announced, turning to Harribel. She stood ready, flanked by the ever-watchful Apache, Mila Rose. And Sun. They were clad in their full combat gear, their expressions a mixture of trepidation and aggressive defiance. They were stepping into a world that was he living embodiment of everything they were not. Harribel met his gaze, her golden eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty she would never voice. What will it be like? Loud, Naruto said with a small smile. And wet. She gave a curt nod and, without a moment's hesitation, stepped through the portal. The Trace Bastias followed a half-second later, a loyal phalanx at her back. Naruto was the last to cross, and as he stepped through, the azure gate behind him swirled shut, collapsing into a single point of light that winked out of existence, leaving the white desert of Hueco Mundo to its silent, lonely vigil. The sensory shock was immediate and overwhelming. For Harribel and her Fracken, who had known only the sterile, silent desert and the bone-dry architecture of Las Noches, the world they stepped into was an assault. The air was the first thing they noticed. It was thick, heavy, and saturated with the smell of damp earth, salt, and decaying leaves. It was a scent that was complex, chaotic, and aggressively alive. And then came the sound. The constant, soft patter of falling rain. The whisper of wind through the leaves of colossal, ancient trees. The distant cry of a seabird. The unending roar of the ocean, a deep, resonant bass note that was the heartbeat of this new reality. They had emerged on a high, mist-shrouded cliff overlooking a turbulent, gray-green sea. The sky was a tapestry of heavy, dark clouds. And a steady drizzle was falling, soaking their white uniforms in seconds, plastering their hair to their skin. Apache recoiled as if struck. "What is this filth?" she hissed, wiping a raindrop from her face with disgust. "It's everywhere." Mila Rose stood rigid, her powerful frame tensed, her amber eyes wide as she stared at the sheer, unbridled vitality of the forest that pressed in on all sides. Trees taller than any structure in Las Noches, their bark covered in vibrant green moss, their branches heavy with water. "The reishi," she murmured, "it's so thick. So wild." Sun, for once, was silent, her head tilted back, letting the rain fall on her face. Her mask of mocking indifference had slipped, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. She could feel the life in the very soil beneath her feet, in the insects crawling on the bark of the trees, in the water that was soaking her to the bone. This world was a screaming, chaotic symphony of existence. And it was utterly terrifying. Harribel was the most composed, but even she was affected. She stood at the edge of the cliff, her gaze fixed on the churning ocean below. It was not the calm, controlled pool of Naruto's oasis. This was a wild, untamed thing of immense power, a force of nature that dwarfed anything she had ever seen. She felt a drop of rain trace a path down her cheek, and the sensation was so alien, so real, that it made her shiver. She had commanded water as a weapon, a jet of focused destruction. This was water as a principle of life itself, omnipresent and absolute. Naruto stood beside her, the rain seeming to part around him, his clothes remaining inexplicably dry. He felt none of their shock. Instead, he felt a profound sense of coming home, not to a village, but to his element. The power of the ocean surged into him, a tidal wave of energy that made his strength in Hueco Mundo feel like a flickering candle in comparison. He was a god in his own cathedral. "Welcome to my world," he said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the sea. "This is the land of water." Before Harribel could respond, they were no longer alone. From the mists, figures emerged, their movements silent and swift. They were shinobi, clad in the gray pinstriped uniforms of Kurigakure, the village hidden in the mist. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace, their faces covered by masks. Kunai held at the ready. Within seconds, Naruto and his companions were surrounded by at least 24 elite Jonin. Then, the mist parted, and two figures stepped forward. One was a young man with a gentle face and a longsword strapped to his back, his expression calm and observant. Chojuro. The other was a woman of stunning beauty, with auburn hair styled in an intricate knot, a kind smile on her lips, and eyes that held the shrewd, dangerous glint of a seasoned leader. Mei Terumi, the fifth Mizukage, had arrived. Her gaze swept over the Arankar, her smile never faltering, but her eyes assessing their strange uniforms, their bone-white mask fragments, their immense and alien spiritual pressures. Then her eyes landed on Naruto. "Uzumaki Naruto," she said, her voice smooth and pleasant, yet laced with steel. "It has been some time. I must confess, I did not expect to see you again so soon after the summit. And I certainly did not expect you to appear in the heart of my country, unannounced, with companions of such an unusual nature." Naruto met her gaze, his expression calm and unreadable. He was not the excitable genin she had briefly met at the 5-cage summit. There was a depth and stillness to him now, an authority that radiated from him like heat from a flame. "Mizukage-sama," he said, his tone respectful but not subservient. "My apologies for the intrusion. The matter is urgent, and this location was the most suitable for our arrival." Mei's smile tightened slightly. She recognized the change in him immediately. This was not a Konoha shinobi reporting in. This was a foreign power stating his presence. Her eyes drifted to Harribel. "And your companion, she radiates a power I have never encountered. It is formidable." The unspoken RT of her sentence hung in the air, and it feels like a hollow. "This is Tear Harribel," Naruto introduced her, stepping slightly to the side to afford Harribel a clear view. "She is the sovereign ruler of her own world, Hueco Mundo. And she is my partner." The word, partner, sent a ripple of murmurs through the Kiri shinobi. Mei's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. She had expected him to call her an ally, perhaps a contact. Partner implied an equality, a shared power block that was independent of any village. Harribel stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting the Mizukage's. She offered no smile, no pleasantries. She was a queen addressing another leader, her posture radiating a power and authority that was utterly alien to the shinobi but unmistakably regal. "Mizukage," Harribel said, her voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "We are not here as enemies. We are here to offer you a warning." May's pleasant demeanor sharpened. A warning? From a self-proclaimed queen of another world. Forgive me if I remain skeptical. The last time a powerful outsider offered the world a warning, it was Pain, and he leveled Konoha to make his point. "This threat is not of our making, nah." Ruto interjected before tensions could escalate. "It is a cosmic entity that seeks the annihilation of all life, in all worlds. We fought its scouts in Hueco Mundo. Greer, one of Harribel's own commanders, was corrupted by it. It's coming for this world, too." He spoke with such absolute conviction that even the hardened Kiri shinobi felt a chill. But May was a cage, and she dealt in facts and proof. Not in pronouncements from boys who had vanished and reappeared with god-like power and monstrous allies. "These are extraordinary claims, Naruto-kun," May said, her tone hardening. "You disappear from Konoha, abandoning your village in a time of crisis. You return with beings that feel like the monsters we have fought for generations, and you speak of a war against the stars. You must understand how this looks." "I understand perfectly," Naruto replied, his calm unwavering. "It looks insane. That's why I didn't come here to talk." As he spoke, a piercing shriek echoed from the coast, miles down from their position. It was a sound of metal tearing and people screaming. A huge plume of black smoke began to rise into the gray sky. Every shinobi, including Mei and Chojuro, spun toward the sound. It was coming from the direction of a major port city, one of Kirigakure's primary trade hubs. "What was that?" Chojuro asked, his hand tightening on the hilt of Hiramakere. Naruto's glowing blue eyes were already fixed on the distant smoke. "That," he said, his voice grim, "is the proof." A new kind of presence had just appeared on his sensory map. A pinprick of absolute nothingness, a void in the vibrant tapestry of life. But this one was larger, stronger, and more focused than the one they had fought in the desert. It had bypassed all of Kirigakure's sensory nets and appeared directly in the heart of a populated area. It hadn't come for them. It had come for the biggest concentration of life it could find. "It's another one," Harribel stated, her hand already on her blade. Stronger than the last. May's face was a mask of cold fury. An attack on her people, in her land. Her internal debate was over. "All units, to the port, evacuate the civilians, engage the enemy." The Kiri shinobi vanished in blurs of motion, leaping through the giant trees with practiced speed. May turned to Naruto, her eyes blazing. "This is your doing. You brought this thing here." "It was already coming," Naruto shot back, his own patience wearing thin. "My arrival just made it show its hand sooner. Now are you going to stand here and assign blame, or are you going to fight it with us?" There was no time to argue. May gave a sharp, angry nod and took off, her speed rivaling any of her subordinates. Chojuro followed, casting a worried glance back at Naruto. Naruto looked at Harribel and her fracken. "Stay close. This world's fighters are different. They use tricks, elements. Don't underestimate them. And they would be wise not to underestimate us," Mila Rose growled, a savage grin on her face. A real fight was something she understood far better than this world's oppressive humidity. Naruto created a platform of solid, compressed water beneath their feet. "Hold on," he said, and the platform shot forward, skimming through the treetops at a velocity that left even May's Jonin speed in the dust. They arrived at the port city in less than a minute, and the scene was one of carnage and chaos. A massive, gaping hole had been torn in the central pier. Several large trading ships were half sunk, their masts splintered. But the destruction was strangely clean, almost surgical. There was no fire, no explosive residue. Objects and people had simply been erased. In the center of the devastation hovered the source, a void herald. This one was different from the scout. It was larger, its form more defined, resembling a tall, slender figure draped in a cloak of shifting darkness. It had two distinct arms, and it moved with a chilling, deliberate grace. It was no longer just an animal acting on instinct. It was a soldier carrying out an objective. Kiri shinobi were already engaging it. They launched a volley of water dragon jutsu. The massive serpents of water charged the herald, only to dissolve into nothingness a few feet from its body. A team of sword masters, the famed 7 swordsmen of the mist, or what was left of them, tried to get close, but their blades passé. Through the herald's smoky form as if it were air, while the herald's lightest touch caused a shinobi's arm to simply vanish, leaving behind a terrified, screaming warrior. It's useless. One of the shinobi cried out. Our jutsu don't work. We can't touch it. Mei Terumi landed on a nearby rooftop, her face grim. She saw the futility of her Fosa's attacks. This was a conceptual enemy, just as Naruto had claimed. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a strategy against an enemy that did not obey the laws of their reality. Naruto's water platform settled onto the same rooftop. Standard ninjutsu is useless, he stated, his eyes analyzing the herald's movements. It unmakes chakra constructs on contact. Physical attacks are just as pointless. Then what do we do? Mei demanded, her frustration boiling over. Her people were dying. We adapt, Harribel said, stepping to the forefront. She looked at Naruto. The same strategy as before. Pinpoint strike. It's bigger, Naruto countered. More stable. It'll be harder to overwhelm its focus. We need a bigger distraction. Mei looked between the two of them, watching them strategize with a practiced ease that spoke of a dozen battles fought together. An outsider and a monster. Yet they were more coordinated than her own elite guards. My boil release can create a corrosive vapor, Mei offered, her pragmatism as a cage overriding her suspicion. And my lava release can change the terrain. Can you use that? Naruto's eyes lit up. He turned to her, a spark of his old, enthusiastic self showing through. Corrosive vapor. Can you saturate the entire area? Make it a dense fog. I can, Mei confirmed. Harribel, Naruto said, turning back to his partner. Your Sero. Can you fire it as a wide-angle blast instead of a beam? A shockwave of energy. Harribel nodded. It will be less focused, but the energy output is the same. Perfect. A plan, audacious and complex, snapped into place in Naruto's mind. Alright, here's what we do. Mizukage, I need your fog. Make it as thick and acidic as you can. Harribel, on my signal, you hit the entire area with your Sero. Don't aim for the herald, aim for the fog itself. Apache, Mila Rose, Sun, your job is crowd control. Keep the shinobi back and deal with any debris. Chojuro, he said, looking at the nervous but resolute swordsman, I need you to be ready to channel every ounce of chakra you have into that sword. The assembled warriors, shinobi and Arankar alike, stared at him. He had taken command of the situation with an authority so natural that no one, not even the Mizukage, thought to question it. He wasn't giving orders as a commander, but as a strategist laying out the only path to victory. What will you be doing? Mei asked. Naruto grinned, and for a second, he looked like the hero of Konoha again. I'm going to give it a target it can't ignore. He leapt from the rooftop, landing in the center of the ruined pier, directly in the Void Herald's path. Hey, Smokey, he yelled, his voice ringing with power. You want life? Come and get the main course. The Herald, which had been methodically erasing buildings and people, paused. Its featureless face turned toward Naruto. It felt the immense, concentrated ocean of life energy radiating from him. He was a supernova of existence in its quiet, dark world. It abandoned all other targets and drifted silently, menacingly, toward him. Mizukage, now, Naruto yelled. Mei didn't hesitate. She flashed through a series of hand signs. Boil style. Skilled mist technique. She exhaled a massive cloud of vapor that spread with incredible speed, blanketing the entire port in a thick, white fog. It was not normal mist, it was a highly acidic vapor that sizzled and ate away at stone and metal. The remaining Kiri shinobi, warned by the trace bestias, fell back. The herald, however, was unaffected, its conceptual nature impervious to the acid. It continued its silent advance on Naruto through the dense fog. Harribel, Naruto roared. From her rooftop perch, Harribel raised her hand, golden energy gathering. But instead of a beam, she unleashed it as a concussive, 360-degree wave. Sero. The blast of energy slammed into the acidic fog. The effect was not what anyone expected. The Sero's energy superheated Mei's vapor, causing a massive, instantaneous chain reaction. The entire volume of acidic mist underwent a phase transition, turning from a gas into a volatile, superheated plasma. For a brief, stunning moment, the entire port was engulfed in a storm of swirling, golden, corrosive energy. The Void Herald was caught in the center of this elemental chaos. It was being assaulted from every direction by two different concepts at once: the chemical corrosion of the acid and the raw energy of the Sero. Its ability to negate was overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of the attack. Its dark form flickered violently, struggling to unmake the storm around it. It was the opening Naruto needed. "Chojuro!" he yelled. From the sidelines, Chojuro, his face set in grim determination, unleashed Haramakare. A massive amount of chakra poured into the twin blades, forming a colossal hammer of pure blue energy. At the same time, Naruto thrust his hands forward. He drew upon the sea itself, the vast, churning ocean behind the port. A titanic wave, hundreds of feet high, rose from the depths. But it did not crash forward. Instead, all its mass and momentum was channeled, compressed, and funneled into a single, unbelievably dense spear of water, aimed at the faltering herald. "Now!" Naruto bellowed. Chojuro swung his chakra hammer, not at the herald, but at the base of Naruto's water spear, striking it like a divine blacksmith striking an anvil. The impact of the chakra-infused blow acted as a propellant, accelerating the already hypersonic water spear to near light speed. The spear, now glowing with the blue energy of Haramakare, became a thin, brilliant line of destruction. It crossed the distance to the herald in less than a picosecond. The herald, its defenses shattered by the plasma storm, had no time to react. The spear of hyper-accelerated, chakra-infused water struck it dead center. The result was an attack on three conceptual levels: the kinetic force of a mountain moving at relativistic speeds, the elemental nature of pure, life-giving water, and the spiritual energy of a shinobi's chakra. Faced with this tri-fold contradiction, the Void Herald's nature broke. There was a sound like shattering glass echoing on a cosmic scale. A web of brilliant blue cracks spread across the herald's dark form. Then, it did not implode or explode. It simply crumbled, dissolving into a cascade of inert, black sand that was washed away by the receding tide. The plasma storm dissipated. The mist cleared. The sun, as if finally allowed to, broke through the clouds. Silence descended on the ruined port. Naruto stood on the pier, breathing heavily, the sea behind him slowly calming. The Kiri shinobi, the Tres Bestias, Mei, and Chojuro all stared at the empty space where the monster had been, their minds struggling to process the scale of the power they had just witnessed. They had not just seen a battle. They had seen a symphony of destruction, conducted by a blonde-haired young man with the eyes of the ocean. Mei Terumi landed softly beside him, her face stripped of all previous skepticism. Her city was in ruins, her people were dead, but she had seen the enemy with her own eyes. And she had seen the only effective way to fight it. She looked at Naruto, then at Harribel, who now stood on his other side. She saw their easy partnership, the devastating fusion of their powers with her own. Her world had just gotten infinitely larger and more dangerous. But for the first time, it also held a new, terrifying kind of hope. "Uzumaki Naruto," Mei said, her voice quiet but firm, filled with the grim resolve of a wartime leader. "You have your alliance. Tell me everything." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Unwanted Summit. The summons went out on the wings of Kurigakare's fastest messenger birds and through the most secure chakra-based communication networks. The message was brief, stark, and carried the full weight of the Mizukage's authority. An emergency 5-cage summit was to be held in the Land of Iron. The subject: Uzumaki Naruto and an extra-dimensional threat. The tone was not one of request, but of dire necessity. The location was neutral ground, a concession to the simmering tensions. The Land of Iron's samurai, led by the stoic General Mifune, were masters of impartiality. Their fortress, a stark edifice nestled among snow-dusted peaks, was a place where words were meant to be the only weapons drawn. But as the delegations arrived, the air was already thick with the chill of impending conflict, a cold that had nothing to do with the altitude. Naruto and Harribel arrived last. They were not escorted by Kiri shinobi, but walked into the main summit hall alone. A self-contained unit of two. Their entrance silenced the room. Harribel, in her pristine white Arankar uniform, was a stark and predatory presence against the dark wood and stone. Her mask fragment, her sheathed zanpakuto, and the suffocating weight of her spiritual pressure announced her as something wholly other, a monster from the tales used to frighten shinobi children. Naruto had changed again. He wore a simple, high-collared dark blue coat, unadorned and practical. But the authority he carried was now undeniable. His calm, deep blue eyes swept over the assembled cage, not with the hopeful earnestness of the boy who had once begged the Raikage for Sasuke's life, but with the measured gaze of a fellow sovereign assessing the board. He and Harribel did not take the seats designated for guests. They stood opposite the semicircle of cage, a separate and equal power. The reactions were immediate and varied. Gaara, the cage, sat perfectly still, his turquoise eyes fixed on Naruto. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a deep, searching intensity. He saw the change in his friend, the immense, calm power that had replaced the frantic, desperate energy of his youth. He saw the loneliness in that power, and his heart, which had only learned to feel because of Naruto, ached with a familiar sympathy. Onoki, the elderly Tsuchikage, floated above his chair, his arms crossed. His rheumy eyes narrowed. He saw not a hero or a threat, but an asset. An untamed, god-like power that, if it could be controlled or manipulated, would shift the balance of power irrevocably. His mind was already whirring with calculations of profit and loss. The fourth Raikage was a thundercloud of contained rage. He sat with his massive arms crossed, muscles bulging. To him, this was simple. A Jinchuriki had abandoned his village, allied himself with a hollow-like creature, and now presumed to stand on equal footing with the leaders of the world. It was an affront to the entire shinobi system. His fingers twitched, itching to solve this problem with overwhelming speed and force. Tsunade, representing Konoha as Hokage, looked haggard. She was caught between her lingering affection for Naruto, her duty as Hokage, and the immense political pressure from her own village. Beside her, in an advisor's chair, sat Danzo Shimura. His presence was a deliberate provocation. His one visible eye was fixed on Naruto, cold and calculating. He was the specter of the old way, the embodiment of the system Naruto had rejected. Mei Terumi, the host of this impromptu gathering, was the first to speak. "I thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice formal and strained. "I would not have called this summit if the matter were not of the utmost urgency. My country has been attacked. A major port has been devastated, with significant loss of life. The enemy was not a shinobi nation." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "It was a being of a nature we cannot fight with conventional means. It was defeated, but only through the combined efforts of my forces and our guests." She gestured towards Naruto and Harribel. The Raikage slammed his fist on the table, the wood cracking under the force of the blow. "Guests, that is Uzumaki Naruto, a deserter from Konoha. And that thing beside him is a hollow, is it not? You ally yourself with monsters, Mizukage, and you bring them to this sacred hall. This is treason. It is survival." Raikage Dono, Mei countered, her voice dangerously calm. "A concept you may soon have to become reacquainted with. The creature I saw would have wiped my city from the map, and your precious shinobi would have been as helpless against it as children with rocks." "She is correct." Gaara's voice, quiet and raspy, drew all eyes. He had not taken his gaze off Naruto. "The power I feel from Naruto-kun, and from the one he calls his partner, it is beyond our own. And the disturbance I felt from the erection of the land of water, it was not of this world. Naruto, tell us, what is this threat?" It was the first time someone had asked him directly, without accusation. Naruto's gaze softened for a moment as he looked at his friend. Before he could speak, Danzo's chilling voice cut through the room. "Before the deserter spins his tales, let us address the reality of the situation. Uzumaki Naruto has abandoned his post, stolen a valuable village asset, namely, himself, and allied with an enemy of humanity. He has displayed an unstable and unprecedented power that threatens the global balance. He is not here to be negotiated with. He is a rogue weapon that must be contained and sealed, for the good of the world." Several of Konoha's Anbu guard tensed, their hands moving towards the seals hidden in their pouches. The samurai lining the walls gripped the hilts of their katanas, their neutral stance wavering. The temperature in the room plummeted. A pressure, cold and immense, descended on them all. It was Naruto. He wasn't flaring his power. He was simply letting a fraction of it leak out. The air grew heavy, thick with the feeling of the crushing depths of the ocean. It was a silent, effortless display of dominance that made the Raikage's outburst seem like a child's tantrum. Sealed. Naruto's voice was soft, yet it carried to every corner of the room, a low murmur that vibrated in their bones. You are still thinking in terms of cages, Danzo. Your world is so very small. He looked at the cage, his glowing blue eyes holding them all captive. You speak of the balance of power, of village assets and deserters. You are arguing about the color of the curtains while the house is on fire. I am not here to ask for your help. I am not here to beg for your approval. I am here to offer you a chance to survive. He raised his hand. From the water pitcher on the table, a small amount of liquid floated into the air. It swirled, darkened, and then solidified into a small, black shard. Identical to the one Greer had crushed. It pulsed with a chilling, soul-crushing emptiness that was visible even to the naked eye. This is a remnant, Naruto said, his voice grim. A piece of the power that drives our enemy. I am offering you the chance to feel it for yourselves. To understand what is coming. He flicked his wrist. The shard hovered in the center of the room. The effect was immediate. The cage, the bodyguards, even the stoic samurai, felt it. It was a psychic poison. It didn't attack the body, it attacked the soul. It whispered of the futility of struggle, the meaninglessness of emotion, the sweet, silent peace of non-existence. Hopes and ambitions withered in its presence. The will to fight, to live, to even breathe, felt like a pointless, exhausting effort. Onoki grunted, his aged body trembling under the conceptual assault. The Raikage's fury was replaced by a hollow weariness, his powerful muscles feeling as heavy as lead. Tsunade grew pale, the shard's aura dredging up every loss, every failure. Whispering that it would have been better if she had never tried at all. Only Gaara, who had known the profound emptiness of being a loveless monster, could withstand it without faltering. Recognizing the call of the abyss he had so narrowly escaped, Harribel watched, her face impassive. She saw the leaders of the civilized world crumble before a mere echo of the enemy she now faced. Her estimation of their strength dropped precipitously. After a long, agonizing 10 seconds, Naruto clenched his fist. The shard imploded, vanishing without a trace. The oppressive psychic weight lifted. The cage gasped, sweat beading on their brows, the life and color rushing back into their faces. They had just tasted the void, and it had nearly broken them. That, Naruto said into the stunned silence, was a drop of its blood. Imagine an ocean. That is what is coming. It is called the Silent King. It is a cosmic entity that believes life is a flaw to be corrected. Its heralds are already here, scouting, corrupting, preparing the way for its arrival. It cannot be fought with ninjutsu. It cannot be sealed with fuinjutsu. It unmakes them on a conceptual level. It does not want to rule you. It wants to erase you. The room was utterly silent. Danzo's face was ashen. The Raikage was trembling, not with rage, but with the aftershock of the profound existential dread he had just experienced. Onoki looked his age for the first time, the horrifying nihilism of the shard's aura having shaken his pragmatic worldview to its core. How do you fight it? Tsunade asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not like this, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over their divided ranks. Not as 5 villages squabbling over power and influence. You fight it together, all of you, with them. He gestured to Harribel, and with me. We have found a way. A fusion of different types of power, different concepts of reality, can disrupt its nature. My life-giving water, Harribel's focused energy. The Mizukage's elemental ninjutsu. We created a paradox it could not process. He was offering them a blueprint for survival, but it required them to do the one thing they had been able to do, truly trust each other. An alliance, Gaara murmured, his eyes alight with understanding. Not just between our villages, but between our worlds. Impossible, the Raikage roared, some of his bluster returning, though it was now laced with a desperate fear. We will not fight alongside hollows. We will find our own way. There is no other way. Harribel's voice, cold and sharp, cut him off. My world is dying. Yours is next. You can cling to your pride and your prejudice, and you can be erased alone. or you can stand with us and fight. The choice is yours. But the enemy will not wait for you to debate it. The tension in the room was at its peak. The cage were torn between centuries of ingrained hatred and the undeniable truth of the terror they had just felt. It was a stalemate of fear versus pride. And then the world went silent. It wasn't the psychic silence of the void shard. It was a literal, physical silence. The whistling of the wind outside the fortress stopped. The crackling of the torches in the hall ceased. The sound of their own breathing vanished. Every ambient noise was gone. Then, a new presence appeared in the center of the room. It did not arrive with a flash of speed or a tear in space. It simply was. It was taller than the herald they had fought at the port, its form more solid, less smoky. It wore what looked like a tattered robe of solidified shadow, and its head was adorned with a crown of jagged, black crystals that seemed to absorb the light. It had a face, of a sort, a smooth, gray expanse with two glowing, crimson points of light where eyes should be. This was no scout. This was a commander, an intelligent, sentient being of immense power. General Mifune and his samurai moved instantly, their blades drawn, forming a protective circle around the cage. The Anbu guards of every village flashed into position, kunai and jutsu at the ready. The creature's crimson eyes swept over the room, dismissing the shinobi and samurai as irrelevant. Its gaze landed on Naruto and Harribel. A voice echoed in their minds, not in their ears. It was a cold, precise, and infinitely arrogant telepathic message. Less than anomaly designated, Ocean Sovereign. Contradiction designated, Hollow Queen. Your energetic resonance signatures have been logged. You are the primary impediments to the Great Correction. This unit has been dispatched to perform a threat assessment. The Herald raised a slender, three-fingered hand. It did not attack. It simply flexed its will. Every shinobi in the room, from the cage down to the lowest guard, felt it instantly. Their chakra vanished. It wasn't blocked or suppressed. It was just gone. Their internal reservoirs felt utterly empty, the intricate pathways of their chakra networks suddenly dormant and cold. The Raikage's lightning armor sputtered and died. Onoki dropped from the air, landing heavily in his chair. Tsunade's strength-enhancing chakra faded, and the lines of age on her face deepened. The Herald then turned its attention to Harribel. The immense, oppressive spiritual pressure she radiated flickered and died, snuffed out like a candle flame. She gasped, a hand going to her chest. Her connection to her Ryutsu, the very source of her power as an Irankar, had been severed. Only Naruto remained untouched. His power was not chakra. It was not Ryutsu. It was something more primordial. A fundamental force of the planet itself. The Herald's nullification field, designed to shut down the conventional energy systems of this reality, had no effect on him. He stood alone, an island, of vibrant blue energy in a room full of suddenly powerless mortals. The Herald's crimson eyes narrowed on him, a flicker of what might have been surprise in its telepathic voice. Less than primary anomaly's energy source is unconventional, non-standard, analysis required, greater than. The Herald took a step toward Naruto. Harribel, despite being rendered powerless, moved. She drew her Zanpakuto, its spiritual abilities gone, and stood in front of Naruto. The blade now just a sharp piece of steel. It was a suicidal, purely instinctual act of protection. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder and gently moved her behind him. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm. "I've got this." He faced the Herald, the full, untamed power of the ocean welling up inside him. The floor beneath his feet grew damp. The air grew thick with mist. Threat assessment. Naruto's voice was dangerously low. "All right, assess this." He didn't move. He didn't attack. He simply unleashed his presence. The atmospheric pressure in the room, which he had subtly increased before, now multiplied tenfold, 100-fold. The stone floors groaned. The massive wooden table began to splinter. The cage and their guards were forced to their knees, gasping for breath under the immense, invisible weight. The Void Herald stopped. The crushing force was a purely physical phenomenon, something its energy-nullifying field could not affect. Its form began to flicker, its corporal integrity straining under the impossible pressure. Less than analysis. Anomaly manipulates fundamental physical laws. Threat level, recalibrating. Greater than. The Herald decided its mission was complete. It had assessed the primary threats and identified the nature of their powers. It had demonstrated its own terrifying ability. There was no need for a protracted battle. It raised its hand again, and a small, black portal, a tear in reality, opened behind it. Less than your existence is a temporary statistical error. The king is patient. The correction is inevitable. Greater than. With that final, chilling thought, the herald stepped back into the portal, and it snapped shut, leaving behind a room full of the most powerful people in the world, all of them rendered utterly, humiliatingly powerless. A second after it vanished, the nullification field collapsed. Chakra and Ryutsu flooded back into the assembled warriors, the sensation like a drowning man taking his first breath. The crushing pressure Naruto was exerting vanished. The room was silent for a long, horrified moment. The cage looked at their hands, feeling their power return, but the memory of its absence was a fresh, terrifying wound. They had been reduced to less than academy students in the blink of an eye. All their power, all their pride, all their history, meant nothing. All except for Naruto. He stood there, the only one who had been unaffected. The only one who could fight back. He was no longer just an asset or a deserter. He was their only hope. The Raikage, looked at Naruto, his face a mask of shock, humility, and a new, dawning horror. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the cold reality of their situation. Uzumaki Naruto, he said, his voice raspy and strained. He pushed himself to his feet, a difficult task. He was not addressing a Jinchuriki. He was addressing a world leader. What are your terms? Naruto looked over the broken, terrified faces of the most powerful shinobi in the world. He felt no triumph, only a grim sense of responsibility. Terms, he repeated, his voice echoing in the silent hall. There are no terms. There is only the war. And from this day forward, we fight it together. He turned and stood beside Harribel, their shoulders almost touching, a united front against the coming darkness. The Tri-Realm Alliance is now in effect. Your first order of business, he declared, his voice ringing with the unshakable authority of the Ocean Sovereign, is to prepare your people for a battle against gods. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Soul King's Gambit. The Seraite, the heart of the Soul Society, was a place of eternal, unchanging order. Its white walls and perfectly manicured pathways were a testament to a millennium of tradition, a fortress built not just of stone and spirit particles, but of rules and hierarchy. It was a realm that viewed change with deep suspicion and outside interference with outright hostility. And for the past several weeks, it had been on high alert. The dimensional fabric, usually a placid and predictable tapestry, had begun to fray. Strange energy signatures, chaotic and violent, flared up in the human world and Hueco Mundo, only to vanish. There were ripples, gravitational distortions that the 12th Division's Research and Development Department could not explain. They were the tremors before an earthquake, and they made the ANC and leadership of the Gote 13 deeply uneasy. In the cavernous assembly hall of the 1st Division, the captains stood in two silent rows, their combined spiritual pressure a palpable force that could cow a lesser soul into dust. At their head stood Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. He stood with his eyes closed, his gnarled hands resting atop his cane, which was in reality his Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka. He seemed as ancient and unmovable as the Seraite itself. The reports are consistent, Captain Mayuri Kuritsuchi of the 12th Division chirped, his voice a grating mix of scientific curiosity and utter disdain for everything not related to his research. Anomalous dimensional events of an unknown classification. They do not match known Hollow or Arankar signatures. The energy readings are a fascinating paradox. They register as both a massive expenditure of power and a null energy event simultaneously. Utterly contradictory. I must have a sample. And what of the repo? RTS from our observers in the world of the living. Yamamoto's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. The disappearance of the Konoha Jinchuriki. The attack on the land of water. These events coincide with your anomalous readings. Captain Shunsui Kiyaraku, his floral pink haori draped casually over his shoulders, tipped his straw hat. My sources say things are quite stirred up over there, old man Yama. The 5 Cage held an emergency summit. Rumor has it that Uzumaki Kid showed up with a Vasto Lord class Arankar at his side, spouting stories about a cosmic boogeyman. Sounds like a party I'm sad to have missed. This is no time for jests, Kyoraku, Captain Sajin Komamura's booming voice echoed from behind his heavy helmet. If a Jinchuriki has allied with an Arankar, it represents a grave threat. They are our enemies, are they? Captain Jashiro Yukitaki countered, his gentle voice laced with a thoughtful concern, a persistent cough racking his frame for a moment. Aizen's war is over. Harribel, the current ruler of Hueco Mundo, has shown no hostility towards us. And the boy, Naruto Uzumaki, has fought to protect the world of the living more than most. Perhaps we should investigate before we condemn. Yamamoto's eyes snapped open, ancient and fiery. Investigate. The Gote 13 does not investigate threats. We cauterize them. We are the balance. Any force that seeks to upset it, be it shinobi or Arankar, or this cosmic boogeyman, will be met with the full might of our blades and reduced to ash. That is our law. That is our purpose. His declaration was absolute, a statement of policy that had stood for 1,000 years. There was no room for nuance, no allowance for new paradigms. The Soul Society was order. Everything else was chaos to be purged. As if in direct defiance of his words, the alarms began to shriek. A piercing, soul-jarring wail echoed throughout the entire Seraite, a sound that had not been heard since Aizen's betrayal. A panicked Offie, CER from the 12th Division appeared on a communication screen, his face pale with terror. Captain Commander, unprecedented event. A Garganta is opening, not from Hueco Mundo. It's opening from nowhere. Directly over the Seraite. The energy signature it's that null reading. It's off the charts. Every captain was in motion before the officer finished speaking. They vanished in flashes of Shunpo, reappearing on the high rooftops overlooking the center of their pristine city. The sky above them was tearing open. It was not the jagged, black grin of a standard Garganta. It was a perfect, silent circle of absolute blackness. A hole in the heavens that seemed to be draining the color from the very air. It felt wrong, an offense against the very nature of the soul. And from it, they began to fall. Not hollows, not Arankar. They were the Void Heralds, an army of them. Hundreds of smoky, featureless figures, descending upon the heart of the Soul Society like a rain of black ink. They were silent, organized, and utterly devoid of the chaotic hunger of hollows. They moved with the cold, efficient purpose of an extermination squad. All captains, engage and destroy. Yamamoto's roar was the breaking of a volcano. Show these abominations the futility of challenging the Gote 13. The battle began. It was a glorious, terrible display of power. Captain Byakuya Kuchiki unleashed his Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kajiyoshi, and a tidal wave of 100 million tiny, sakura petal-like blades swept through the invading army. But the heralds were not shredded. The blades that struck them simply vanished. Their existence negated, leaving holes in the magnificent swirl of steel. Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya summoned his great ice dragon, Hirinmaru, which crashed into a phalanx of heralds. The creatures were frozen solid. But a moment later, the ice encasing them turned to gray dust, and they emerged unharmed, the very concept of frozen having been unmade. The Shinigami, for the first time in a millennium, were facing an enemy that their power simply did not work against. Their Zanpakuto were tools designed to cleanse hollows, to cut spirits. But these were not spirits. They were anti-spirits. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Every attack, every Bankai, every powerful Keto spell that struck a herald was simply absorbed, negated, erased. Worse still, the herald's touch was devastating. A lieutenant who parried a blow from a herald's smoky arm screamed as his Zanpakuto, a blade that had been with his soul for centuries, simply ceased to exist from the point of contact. A captain dodged a glancing blow, only to find the sleeve of his Shihakusho and the skin of his arm beneath it gone, not burned or cut, but erased into perfect, scarless nothingness. Panic, an emotion long thought extinct in the hearts of the Gote 13, began to spread. They were the most powerful military force in any of the three worlds, and they were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they could not harm. In the deepest level of the Central 46's underground prison, in the lightless, soundless expanse of Mukin, Sosuke Aizen sat bound to his chair, his entire body restrained, his face covered in seals. He could not see, he could not hear, he could not speak, he was utterly cut off from the universe. And yet, he was aware. His senses, honed by the Hogyoku to a level that transcended the physical. Could feel the turmoil in the Seraite above. He felt the sudden, shocking influx of the Void Heralds. He felt the panic of the captains. He felt the wrongness of the enemy. The conceptual static they introduced into the flow of reality. And he felt a flicker of something else. On the very edge of his perception, from a world away, he felt the resonant, vibrant rum of the Ocean Sovereign and the sharp, golden spark of the Hollow Queen. He had felt them before, faint and distant. But now, they were growing stronger, moving, converging on the current crisis. A slow, cruel, and utterly genuine smile spread across Aizen's face, hidden beneath his layers of seals. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. His imprisonment was not an end, it was a cocoon. He had lost his war against the Soul King, a foolish, short-sighted endeavor in retrospect. He had tried to become god of a flawed system. But now, a new game had begun. A game on a cosmic scale, against an opponent worthy of his intellect. The Silent King. He knew of it, in a way no one else did. In his quest for transcendence, he had peered into the cracks of reality, into the silent spaces between the worlds. He had glimpsed the great, quiet intellect and its desire for universal correction. He had dismissed it then as a philosophical curiosity. Now, he saw it as an opportunity. He could not defeat it. Not alone. Not from this chair. But he could become the indispensable variable in its defeat. He could become the whisper in the hero's ear, the hidden hand that guided the blade. Old trade his knowledge for his freedom, and more. He focused his will, a pinpoint of immense spiritual pressure that was undetectable to any guard. He reached out, not with a broadcast, but with a single, targeted thought. He aimed it at the one captain who possessed both the intellect to understand and the moral flexibility to listen. Shunsui Kyoraku, what a mess this is. They fight with concepts, you know. To defeat them, you need a bigger, better concept. Or, a perfect illusion. The message was a single, seductive breadcrumb dropped into the chaos of the battlefield. The game was afoot, in the land of iron. The post-summit alliance was taking its first, clumsy steps. Naruto, Harribel, and the Cage were headquartered in the Samurai Fortress, a temporary command center for a war that spanned dimensions. They were receiving reports from Mei's shinobi. Strange energy signatures flaring up across the globe, small pockets of reality where things had simply gone missing. The invasion had begun, not as a frontal assault, but as a creeping, cancerous blight. It was then that a new figure arrived, unannounced. A man in green robes and a striped bucket hat, leaning on a cane that concealed a blade. Kazuki Urahara had appeared, a giddy, unnerving smile on his face. Well now, this is quite the gathering, he said, fanning himself. The Tri-Realm Alliance, they're calling it, has a nice ring to it. Though I think you're missing a key member. Urahara, Tsunade said, her voice a mixture of relief and suspicion. What are you doing here? How did you get past the samurai? Oh, you know, Urahara said with a wave of his fan. A shopkeeper has to have his secrets. And his own monitoring systems. I've been tracking these dimensional hiccups for weeks. Very messy, very interesting. And it seems they've finally decided to crash the main party. He snapped his fan shut, his smile vanishing, replaced by a sudden, sharp seriousness. The Soul Society is under attack. A massive 4 of those, let's call them, nulls, has invaded the Seraite. The Gote 13 can't harm them. They're being routed. The news hit the room like a physical blow. The Raikage scoffed, impossible. The Gote 13 are arrogant fools. But they are not weak. Against an enemy whose very nature invalidates their own, they are, Urahara countered. He looked at Naruto and Harribel. Your combined concept attacks are the only thing that has proven effective. The Soul Society doesn't have that kind of diversity. They are a monoculture of Shinigami power. They are going to be annihilated. Naruto's jaw tightened. He had no love for the stuffy, arrogant Shinigami, but he wouldn't wish erasure on them. More pragmatically, he knew the Gote 13 were a powerful military force. A potential ally, an Anihila. Ted's Soul Society would leave a power vacuum the Silent King would be all too happy to fill. Can you get us there? Naruto asked, his voice sharp and decisive. Urahara's grin returned. I thought you'd never ask. He tapped his cane on the floor. A swirling vortex of purple energy, the Senkaimon Gate, materialized before him. It's a bit of a bumpy ride, and the Soul Society's defenses are irritable at the moment. But I can get you through. The real question is, what will you do when you get there? They're more likely to attack you than to thank you. Let me worry about that, Naruto said. He turned to Harribel, ready for another party. Harribel met his gaze, her hand resting on her Zanpakuto. Her power had returned, but the memory of its absence was a cold fire in her gut. She had been rendered helpless. A feeling she had not experienced since Aizen's betrayal. She would not let it happen again. They are arrogant and foolish, she stated, referring to the Shinigami. But they are a part of this world. And this world is now under our protection. It was a declaration of profound change. The queen of the self-contained world of Hueco Mundo had just claimed a stake in the survival of her enemies. Her partnership with Naruto was reshaping her worldview. Without another word, they stepped into the gate. It swirled shut behind them, leaving the cage and Urahara in the silent fortress. Well, Urahara said, putting his hat back on. This should be interesting. Place your bets, everyone. My money's on the ocean. Naruto and Harribel emerged from the Senkaimon into a scene of beautiful, ordered destruction. They were on a high rooftop, overlooking a plaza where a battle was raging. Cherry blossom blades, waves of fire, and spears of ice were all being thrown at the silent, black-robed heralds. And all of it was being negated. They saw captains, beings of immense power, fighting a desperate, losing battle. On the ground below, Captain Kiraku was in trouble. He was facing 3 heralds at once. His twin blades, Kaden Kyokutsu, proving useless. He was relying purely on his incredible speed to stay alive, dodging and weaving, unable to land a single effective blow. A herald's hand swiped at him. And though he dodged, it erased the sleeve of his prized pink haori. Oh, come on, Shunsui cried out, genuinely offended. That was limited edition. It was then he felt the 2 new presences appear above him. One was a vast, deep, life-affirming power that felt like a living ocean. The other was a sharp, golden, predatory power that felt like a shark cutting through the water. He also remembered the strange, intrusive thought from moments before. A bigger, better concept, or a perfect illusion. His eyes widened in understanding. The heralds also sensed the new arrivals. The 3 menacing Shunsui turned as one, their attention now fixed on the far greater threats of Naruto and Harribel. Looks like we're up, Naruto said. Let's not keep them waiting, Harribel replied. They didn't discuss a plan. They didn't need to. They moved. Harribel raised her hand and unleashed a torrent of Sero blasts, not as beams, but as glowing golden projectiles, Bala. They were weaker than a Sero, but incredibly fast. She wasn't aiming to destroy the heralds, but to herd them. The volley of golden energy forced the 3 heralds together, their forms jostling as they negated the incoming attacks. At the same instant, Naruto acted. He drew on the vast underground waterways of the Seraite, the lifeblood of the city that its inhabitants took for granted. The ornate flagstones of the plaza cracked and split, and 3 massive torrents of water erupted upwards, forming a swirling, high-pressure cage around the clustered heralds. A water prison. But this was no simple jutsu. It was a churning vortex of immense force, trapping the heralds within. The Shinigami fighting nearby stopped, their battles momentarily forgotten as they stared at the impossible sight. A man, with blonde hair and a woman who looked like an Arankar had appeared from nowhere and, in a single, coordinated move, had done what their entire captain class had failed to do: contain the enemy. Inside the vortex, the heralds began to negate the water. But Naruto was continuously feeding it, drawing on a near-limitless supply. For every gallon they unmade, 2 more took its place. They were trapped, ped in a battle of attrition against an ocean. It's not enough to hold them, Harribel said, landing beside Naruto. They'll eventually negate it all. They don't have to, Naruto replied, his eyes glowing. They just have to stay put. He focused, and the water in the vortex began to spin faster, the pressure increasing exponentially. He was creating a centrifuge, a whirlpool of devastating force. The heralds were thrown together, their forms beginning to distort under the sheer physical pressure. And then, Naruto introduced the final element. He infused the water with his own life concept, the vibrant, chaotic energy of the ocean. The heralds were now trapped in a paradoxical hell. They were being crushed by a physical force they could not negate, while simultaneously being assaulted by a life energy that was anathema to their void nature. With a final, silent scream that echoed in the mind, the three heralds destabilized. Their forms broke apart, not into sand, but into flashes of contradictory light and shadow. And then they were gone. Naruto released the vortex, the water splashing back down into the ruined plaza. He and Harribel stood in the sudden silence, the eyes of dozens of Shinigami, including a stunned and disheveled Shunsui Kyoraku, fixed upon them. The moment of quiet was broken by a roar of incandescent rage. A pillar of fire erupted from the central tower, and a moment later, Captain Commander Yamamoto appeared before them, his entire body radiating an inferno of spiritual pressure. His ancient face was contorted in a mask of pure fury. Outsiders, deserter, Arankar filth, he bellowed, his voice the sound of a forest fire. Ryujin Jaka was unsheathed, and the air itself began to shimmer with heat. You have defiled the Seraite with your presence. You dare to interfere in our battle. I will burn you from existence myself. He raised his blade, ready to unleash a tide of flame that would vaporize not just Naruto and Harribel, but the entire plaza. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't raise a hand to fight. He simply met the ancient Shinigami's burning gaze with his own calm, oceanic one. We just saved your men and showed you how to fight an enemy that was about to wipe you out. Naruto stated, his voice devoid of fear. If you want to respond by trying to burn us, go ahead. But know that if you do, you will doom not just the Soul Society, your precious balance and everything you claim to protect. Your move, old man. The ultimatum hung in the superheated air, a direct challenge not of power, but of principle. Yamamoto stood poised, a god of fire ready to pass judgment. Faced with a man who would not bow, would not beg, and who held the key to their very survival. The fate of the Soul Society would be decided not by a clash of blades, but by the next choice of its oldest, proudest, and most stubborn warrior. Chapter 7 End.